Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. What's so funny already, Sam?
I don't know if that coughing came across in the thing, but I heard it. It's pretty funny.
Oh, shoot. I was muted. It said I was muted. Wonderful. We'll just delete that. Sam, it's perfect June content day. Perfect day for June. This is your month to shine, actually, historically. This is the type of content that puts you on the map. 12, 13, 11 years ago, whatever it was.
So a week ago. Yeah.
You did another one a week ago? Oh, a week
ago.
No,
it was about a week ago, whatever it is, 10, 11, 12 years ago.
2014, was it? After the 2013 season? Your famous Tom Brady take. But it's listicle season. It's ranking the quarter century teams. We got a couple of those. PFF has theirs. ESPN has theirs. With slightly different criteria, of course. PFF data only goes back to 2006, so it misses the first few years. I think they relied a little bit more on their own data and grading. ESPN goes all the way back to 2000. All quarter century teams. So let's start with this. What were you doing a quarter century ago? Year 2000.
The summer of that was summer before college. So
yeah, we were headed into college. I graduated 25 years ago this month.
Yeah,
high school.
That's right. Yeah, it would have been. And I can't remember how deep our school year went, but it did the end of school year and then start of summer.
So we were heading into college. We were ready to be freshmen in college. It was our recruiting class, just me, you, Brock. Was it Brock Bolin? What was his name? Brock Bolin?
Judging from all those photos I keep finding, I was on the precipice of some kind of boy band career.
You were. It was good times. Brock Berlin is the guy I was trying to think of. Fun and Gun. I got my Fun and Gun shirt on, actually. Timely. He was going to play for Steve Spurrier. He was going to be the next Danny Werfel. That was what was happening the year 2000. Tom Brady was getting drafted in April of 2000. Peyton Manning just coming into his own 25 years ago, Sam. Well, quarter century teams are out. Perfect June content to react to. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's fire it up.
All right. So again, ESPN and PFF both put out their teams. ESPN put a full team together. They went multiple players by position. They went with a practice squad. They have coaches. So there's a little bit more to discuss from an ESPN perspective. You can see the whole thing there if you're watching on YouTube. There's 5 corners on this list. There's 3 running backs, three quarterbacks. We'll go through the whole thing. PFF went their highest graded guy during that time period in the PFF era in an honorable mention. So let's start with the quarterbacks in ESPN. Tom Brady was the quarterback for both teams. PFF's highest graded player during the era. Tom Brady, the top quarterback on ESPN's team here. And then they go with Peyton Manning and Patrick Mahomes as the other 2 quarterbacks for ESPN. What are your thoughts on this one, Sam?
Yeah, so ESPN is putting together a full 53-man roster. So that's how they kind of set the number of players they're picking per position. Quarterback, I think 2 is very easy. And then I think the 3rd is where you start to get debatable. Clearly, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady are quarterbacks 1 and 2 on either list, on any list, really. And to be honest, we were part of putting together some kind of all-time, they've got to be one. They're 2 of the top 4 quarterbacks of all time. They're going to be top 2 in a quarter century team. The 3rd, though, is where it gets interesting. And this is where you get into the kind of philosophical debate is, Patrick Mahomes is on his way to being one of the best quarterbacks of all time and has had a run that rivals any quarterback in NFL history. But is just that run already enough to put him above Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees, the totality of their careers in terms of, because that's what you're talking about, right? Those guys had all of their careers this century. So every single year of the Aaron Rodgers career, which is still going, and of Drew Brees, happened this century. So is just a few years of Patrick Mahomes worth more than the entirety of Aaron Rodgers' career? I don't know that that's true. You can definitely argue it. And I think there's certainly ways you can construct the argument. He's got more rings. But I don't know. we had runs of Aaron Rodgers' career where we were talking about like, this is the best it's ever been. You know, Tom Brady never did this. Peyton Manning never did this. Rodgers is it. And, you know, we also, but the problem is we then had down spells as well. And now we're in the middle of it. So it's like Rodgers is on a low ebb of reputation. You know, Mahomes hasn't really had the downswing yet, or at least not a significant one.
Yeah. I mean, I think for these lists, and I don't know the exact, sorry, I didn't read it specifically on the criteria for ESPN. Were they looking at specific years? Because obviously we're talking when
they cut off
talking,
everything before the millennium. So anyone,
no, I get that. So it's
crossed it.
No, but I'm saying, did they focus on like 4 year snap? Because we're going to talk about Priest Holmes in a few minutes here. Are they talking about 3 and 4 year snapshots and peaks versus 8-year peaks? I mean, that's when you're debating players of all time. There's so many ways to do it, right? How much do you factor in longevity? How much do you factor in just your top X number of elite years, whether it's 5, whether it's 8, whether it's 10? You know, that's one of the things that makes Brady special is the longevity of elite play. So yeah, it says that they're focused on peak seasons while rewarding longevity. So we'll get to the running back thing in a minute with Priest Holmes.
And again, that's like those two things work in opposition is my point. Like it's a hedge. I mean, they have no defined criteria either. They're just like, yeah, what the hell?
My point in this argument is like what Aaron Rodgers does, kind of like Tom Brady with the Bucs. I don't think anything Brady did with the Bucs was going to hurt his career, how people view his career. It shouldn't. It might.
But it does. See, this is the thing.
Yeah, it does. And my point with Rodgers is I don't think anything he does now should hurt his legacy that gets debated on shouty shows. What's this guy's legacy? I think you're playing with house money after a certain point, because in these debates, you're usually saying, show me the best 10 seasons, show me the best 8 seasons, whatever it may be. The funny thing is Peyton Manning probably elevated, you know, his status because he got a ring in his worst season by far, where he gets dragged to the Super Bowl. So I think you're kind of playing with house money after a certain point. But you're right. I think there is something human about us that says, well, we've had this downswing for Aaron Rodgers, and you factor that in, whereas Mahomes, like you said, has never had it.
We have this debate all the time, which is when players have like an amazing start to their career and they go on a run of like, 6 or 7 seasons where they played out of their minds. And then you have this debate, like if he retired today, he would walk into the Hall of Fame as a first ballot guy. And then I think there's truth to that, which is, like the Terrell Davis, the Kurt Warners of the world. It's slightly different, but guys with these weird truncated careers, I think there's definitely an argument that those guys actually benefit from the shortness but the thing is those guys don't retire today, right? They play. And if they then come back and play and, an injury hits them or something, and you get like 6 or 7 years of average at the end of that, it taints it. It shouldn't, but it does. Like weirdly, playing a number of years after that incredible run and just not being as good is actually damaging versus walking away from the game at that point and never playing another down. And it shouldn't, but I think it does. So, and there's players that didn't make this list that I think fit into that category where they had the run that rivals anything we're going to be looking at. And they're losing out to the modern equivalent who just hasn't had the crappy end of their career yet. And that is what I think is inconsistent and recency bias here. Like we are rewarding the players that haven't shown yet how their career ends, which is to a degree not really within their control.
ESPN, by the way, ESPN's article is written by Aaron Schatz, founder of Football Outsiders, now with FTN and ESPN, and then Seth Walder. I like both Aaron and Seth. Aaron and I have been panelists on the same panel multiple times at the Scouting Combine with SMWW, Sports Management Worldwide. Seth, we've been co-panelists as well at Sloan, friends, colleagues, what have you. So I like both Aaron and Seth. Of course, we're going to pick apart their list, though.
Two nice people. Now let us tell you why they're wrong.
Just wanted to preface that. John Macri, too, again, former colleague at PFF. And again, that's more, the PFF equivalent here is going to be different, but the ESPN one's a little bit more interesting just because they went full team. They added those extra few years, and they've got some highly debatable ones. The last thing I just want to mention about quarterbacks, Chris Sims recently, friend of the show, Chris Sims, was talking about when we talk about this recency bias, he's looking at the big four quarterbacks in the NFL today: Mahomes, Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. I think that's the clear top four, even though I think Burrow gets plenty of debate between him and Justin Herbert. But I think there's far more of a debate around number 5, 6, and 7 in today's NFL. Sims made the point, like, is this the golden age of quarterbacking? And I think we're still I still think we're in the middle of this recency bias. Like, yeah, this chunk of play from those four is great, and it could be comparable to the last era, though, had Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, and Drew Brees. Those were the four for a period of time who were the clear four elite. And then, oh, by the way, the next 5. So this is the point I want to make right now. If you look at Matthew Stafford's career right now, and if you were ranking Matthew Stafford in this era of quarterbacks, I saw him on a list the other day at 6. You're putting Matthew Stafford at 5, 6, 7, 8. Like, he's in the top 8 in this era of quarterbacks. In his first 10 years in the NFL, he doesn't crack the top 10, Sam. Matthew Stafford, let's not run into this recency bias. The quarterbacks, it was loaded in the 2010s in that era. When you have Ben Roethlisberger, Russell Wilson at his peak, Andrew Luck, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, and there's probably 1 or 2 more in there. I don't think Cam Newton was a top 10 quarterback for the majority of his career. I don't think Matthew Stafford was a top 10 quarterback for the majority of his career. The depth at the top was different in that last era. So I don't want to get caught up in that recency bias either.
Well, even just, the 04 class of quarterbacks, like, obviously what was remarkable about the kind of previous generation of quarterbacks was the longevity that they all had. Obviously, you've got Peyton Manning, Tom Brady hanging on for, decades. Drew Brees had a hell of a run as well. Aaron Rodgers is still going. But in that 04 class, you also had Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, and Eli Manning, who was the worst of the 3, but ends up having arguably the best career because he's like Tom Brady's kryptonite twice, and had, this incredible run in 2011 in particular. So, like, that next tier of quarterbacks was an incredible group from the previous generation.
It was. Anything else on QBs here?
QB, I think, like, it's relatively. I think that one is relatively simple. Like I said, the first 2 write themselves: Manning, Brady. Third, it's a debate. I struggle to put Mahomes above Aaron Rodgers because of how much he's done in his career.
You and I were you just said we were just on a panel of quarterback rankers, of the Super Bowl era, and I think you and I both put Mahomes 4 above Aaron Rodgers. So are you backing out on that? Like, I was surprised that you said that, because I agree with this list. I think Brady, Manning, Mahomes. If I'm separating Mahomes and Rodgers, you've got the statistical aspect. I think they're similar. I think Mahomes is closer to Brady and Manning as far as late games, game management, sack avoidance. I just think Mahomes at this point is a tick above Aaron Rodgers, even Aaron Rodgers at his peak. So I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine with this. So are you backing out on what you just sent out there a few weeks ago as part of this panel?
I think when you're talking, there's a difference between, like, who is better, who is more talented, who is,
don't say talented. Don't say talented.
No, shut up.
Don't say talented.
There's a difference between, like, who has a greater degree of ability or ceiling or whatever, and who has had a greater impact over this century, which is 25 years old, but we're only going to count 5 years for one guy. Like, Rodgers has had a greater impact on the 21st century NFL than Mahomes has, I would say.
Okay.
In part because he's played for the majority of it and had it, like, won a Super Bowl, multiple time MVP as well. Like, Mahomes had incredible impact already in just a few short years.
See, I think
those few short years are so small compared with Rodgers.
I think it's fine to focus on a player's best 7 or 8 seasons as the main criteria, because then it's like, okay, just because Aaron Rodgers was born earlier, he's going to make the team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how these things work. I mean, Larry Allen doesn't make the team because he was born 5 years too soon, and half of his career happened in the 90s. Like, that's just the reality of it.
All right, let's go to running back. Start with PFF.
Yeah, well, here's where it gets really spicy.
PFF has Derrick Henry and then honorable mention for Marshawn Lynch. So you could debate the big name that's not on that list right there. But for ESPN, I assume this was the most highly debated one in the ether. They go Priest Holmes, Christian McCaffrey, and then Derrick Henry, with LaDainian Tomlinson making the practice squad. Discuss.
I think this is the most ridiculous position that they've picked. For a moment, right?
By the way, Priest Holmes is RB1.
Yes.
Not just on the team, RB1.
Look, this is a case where I think, you can definitely argue recency bias would make you forget about Priest Holmes entirely. Priest Holmes was a phenomenal running back. I actually comped Christian McCaffrey to Priest Holmes coming out. I love Priest Holmes. I, however, cannot construct an argument that Priest Holmes belongs on this list at all.
The reasoning here, just so everybody knows, again, Schatz and in Football Outsiders, Aaron Schatz developed DVOA as a percentage-based metric to measure player value, and then DYAR, or DR, as I'm calling it, which is more of a cumulative production metric. And so part of the reasoning here is the stretch for Priest Holmes, 3-year stretch, 2001, 2, and 3. And in those 3 years, his seasons ranked 15th, 2nd, and 3rd of all running back seasons back to 1978. So using that metric, that peak for Priest Holmes, so this can get it, debate that or not. I mean, it was special. I'll give you my take in a minute. It was a special 4-year period for Priest Holmes. Yeah. But that was the extent of it. So now this is where you get into this peak, whether or not that was even the best. But then how do you weigh that 4 years versus, say, LaDainian Tomlinson, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, what some of these other guys have done?
So that's the thing. If you're ranking Priest Holmes, it all comes down to this incredibly acute peak where he was phenomenal. But LaDainian Tomlinson basically matched, if not exceeded, that peak. And his longevity is so much larger. So, for example, they kind of, because Priest Holmes played a bunch in the 90s as well. So he, ironically, like a chunk of his career is chopped off as well, because we can't count anything he did for the Ravens because it happened before the year 2000. So we got to focus on it's just his Chiefs career, right? So his resume since 2000, they put on this, is 9,256 all-purpose yards and 85 all-purpose touchdowns, right? LaDainian Tomlinson, whose entire career was post-2000, has 18,456 all-purpose yards. So like 10,000 more, right? And 162 touchdowns, which is like twice as many. You cannot construct an argument that Priest Holmes belongs on this list above LaDainian Tomlinson. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. The NFL's all-decade teams, by the way, have LaDainian Tomlinson on there, and Edgerrin James in the 2000s. Edgerrin James, I think, has a stronger argument than Priest Holmes. That's just the first team. The 2010 list is Adrian Peterson, who's not even mentioned on this thing, or mentioned, but none of the players or the honorable mention. Adrian Peterson just completely missed off the list. LaShawn McCoy, Marshawn Lynch, Frank Gore. Priest Holmes appears nowhere, and I cannot fathom Priest Holmes being on this list. It's insane.
Even if you give Priest Holmes credit for that 3-year stretch, and again, in 2002 and 3, he leads the league with 21 touchdowns in 02, 27 in 03, right? I mean, those were mind-boggling type of stats at that time for Priest Holmes, and caught the ball out of the backfield, over 70 catches a couple of years. I mean, it was a great stretch for Priest Holmes. But then LaDainian Tomlinson comes in, starts to develop, and he was already in the league, but he starts to develop and basically does something similar. I thought it was something similar. For instead of 3 or 4 years, he did it for about 8 or 9 years, right? LaDainian Tomlinson, similar, nose for the end zone, over 5 yards per carry in 2006 with 28 touchdowns, catching the ball 70, 80 times out of the backfield, had 100 catches 1 year out of the backfield as well. And then Adrian Peterson comes into the league. And Peterson, remember, as a true freshman at Oklahoma, looks like an NFL player right away. That was the fun part about this time period and the similarity there. I thought Priest Holmes was doing something that we hadn't seen in a long time. And then it felt like LaDainian Tomlinson came in and matched it and probably topped it. Remember Maurice Clarett in 2003 had one of the best freshman running back seasons we've ever seen in college, does it at Ohio State. He starts talking about, I want to go to the NFL. And then he kind of falls off the map. And then the next year, Adrian Peterson looks like an even better true freshman. And he doesn't say he wants to go to the NFL, but legitimately looked like he could have just stepped right into the NFL, which he did in 2007 as a rookie, breaks the single game rushing record. And then the last piece of evidence on Adrian Peterson, I think he had peak plus longevity, right? Peak plus longevity in the 2012 season where he rushed for over 2,000 yards, wins the MVP, the last running back to win the MVP, over 130 yards per game. And the most mind-blowing stat there was that he averaged more yards per attempt than Christian Ponder, the starting quarterback, averaged per attempt as a passer, right? So you and I sit here on the show all the time. We neglect running backs a lot because our pass-first league, and get your quarterback and get your O-line and get your receivers. And, oh, by the way, top it off with a running back. Adrian Peterson had this season where he was the guy in 2012 going for over 2,000 yards, and he had that epic game, I think, against Green Bay last week of the season to get the Vikings into the playoffs. Adrian Peterson was the absolute engine to that offense. Whereas if you look at LaDainian Tomlinson and Priest Holmes and some of these other guys, like they were part of some really good offenses, right? Tomlinson had Phillip Rivers, some good pass catchers. Priest Holmes had the Rams high-powered system coming into Kansas City and Trent Green. And so Peterson was the guy for that offense for a few years in Minnesota.
Yeah, so look, I think LaDainian Tomlinson is RB1 on this list comfortably in terms of the criteria, the stats, the longevity, everything is there for LaDainian Tomlinson. I think Derrick Henry belongs on the list as well. You look at, ESPN summing up, he's got 13,000 all-purpose yards, 111 total touchdowns. I think Derrick Henry would be one of your three running backs over the last 25 years and still going. The third one I think is interesting as a debate. Adrian Peterson is the discussion that I find kind of fascinating because as a pure physical runner, I think he's the best running back of the last 25 years. Nobody has been able to come close to what Adrian Peterson has done. But in an era where the league has been going ever more pass heavy and the passing game is becoming ever more important, Adrian Peterson was so bad as a passing option, both in terms of a receiving option and a blocker, that his teams would literally take him off the field for like obvious passing situations.
Chester
right?
Taylor, man.
I don't think that's
Chester
true
Taylor.
for any of these other running backs. Derrick Henry to an extent, but less than Adrian Peterson. Like they would take 2-minute drills. The Vikings would take him off the field. That's insane. And yet, even with that true, just his Minnesota career gives him 13,500 all-purpose yards and 100 total touchdowns, right? That's a greater resume than Christian McCaffrey has by like 3,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. So Christian McCaffrey, this unique best receiving back of the last, whatever, he's still 3,000 yards behind Peterson, 20 touchdowns, and he's got an offensive player of the year. Well, Adrian Peterson won MVP. So even like the fancy award thing that goes to his name, Adrian Peterson had a better one. So I can't really come up with a good reason why you would put McCaffrey over Peterson. And then you go back, by the way, to can you really construct an argument that Christian McCaffrey belongs there above Edgerrin James or, some of these guys that were on the all-decade teams in the last 20 years? I don't know that you can yet.
Does Adrian Peterson get hurt by the way his career ended? I mean, after his Minnesota
so he's a good example of that, right?
Yeah. He went – do you realize all the teams he played for? I know we talked about this recently off air. New Orleans Saints, Arizona Cardinals, played in Washington for a couple of years, Detroit, Tennessee, and Seattle. I don't think I remember any of those.
What's the squares thing that the NFL, the thing that Eric used to play all the time?
Oh yeah, immaculate grid.
Yeah. Adrian Peterson is going to be the answer to a bunch of immaculate grid things down the line for all these teams he played for that nobody remembers.
Vikings/Seahawks legend Adrian Peterson. I don't know, man. You're right though. I think you summed it up well. Like the pass game hurts Peterson, whereas the reason why McCaffrey's on this list, a Priest Holmes, why we're talking about LaDainian Tomlinson, those guys were the modern running back of this century. Because if we're doing quarter century teams here, what has happened this century? We're seeing fewer 350 plus carry seasons. We're seeing more seasons though where Christian McCaffrey, LaDainian Tomlinson, Priest Holmes, high volume pass catchers, mismatch weapons. All of those guys tick that box. Derrick Henry, you're right, didn't. I thought both Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson fascinating for years. That like, why can't you just catch a screen, right? I just need you to catch the ball and then go do your great running. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to caveman stuff. But like, you're a great runner with the ball in your hands. Can we just do that? You don't have to be McCaffrey. You don't have to be outside running sluggos and, creating those mismatches. Just catch the ball, catch a check down, get upfield, catch a screen, get upfield. Why can't you do that? And
I agree.
Peterson was never fed in that way.
I agree with you. And I thought that throughout Adrian Peterson's career, and I thought it throughout Derrick Henry's as well. But I think we've spent years saying, look, the NFL used to do a lot of stupid things. I don't think they do that much anymore. I think you have to look at the way those teams treated Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson and say, they're not morons, right? If they're not putting him on the field for these situations, it's because they don't think that he is bringing anything above and beyond this random, bum that's the backup scat back that they have on the team on the field in these downs as well. Like there's signal to that, right? The NFL teams are signaling this is a problem in his game. And I think there's something to, like, when we're looking back at these things and analyzing who's the greatest ever, like, you have to at least weigh that, right? But I would argue that the things that they were good at were so amazing that they overcome whatever drag factor that weakness had on their career. So, for example, Pro Football Reference has this thing, AV, approximate value, where it attempts to, throw a sort of value metric on some of this stuff. And again, Adrian Peterson's Vikings career on its own is worth significantly more AV than Christian McCaffrey's entire career. So even things that are presumably, I don't know an awful lot about AV, so I'm not, I don't know how it's constructed. But I'm going to assume
that someone has created.
Right. And I'm going to assume it tries to weigh things like pass game, right? However it's put together, it argues that Adrian Peterson's Minnesota career on its own is significantly better than Christian McCaffrey's entire career. So I get why you put McCaffrey in there, the receiving skills, the uniqueness, the fact that how valuable that is in the modern NFL. I think you're trying to get too cute, though, when you're saying that that's better than Adrian Peterson's entire NFL career, which is what you're doing when you put him on this list. I think that's wrong.
The last thing I want to add here, if we're talking Priest Holmes, Christian McCaffrey, LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, saw the chat mentioning Le'Veon Bell. Let's not forget just how good he was for a stretch of time for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah. But I would say Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson, they're the two that we put into this bucket of better pure runners, not as good from a pass catcher perspective. But I also think if you were making a case for who are the drivers for their offense, I think you would make the case for them the best. I think Peterson, with the uneven quarterback play that they had, and then Henry, look, I've been back and forth on this. When he was a part of those couple Titans teams that, make an AFC championship run, and you get the Ryan Tannehill peak season. And I've made the argument that maybe that's more A.J. Brown than Derrick Henry. I think they were both there. But you could easily make the case that Derrick Henry overcame less than stellar situations. He was also the guy that, remember the time the Titans made that fourth quarter comeback, and every fourth quarter multi-touchdown comeback is a passing league type of deal, right? You're chucking it around, you throw for 200 yards in the fourth quarter, you make a comeback. They were just handing it off to Derrick Henry to get him over his 30 carries, and he's just winning the game. You could make the argument that Henry and Adrian Peterson were the bigger drivers for their respective offenses at points in their career, whereas McCaffrey goes to San Francisco as the cherry on top after having, he dealt with bad stats in a bad Carolina situation, right? And LaDainian Tomlinson was part of some loaded offenses. Priest Holmes' offenses were very, very good in Kansas City, even outside of him. So I think that would be the argument for, say, Henry and Adrian Peterson relative to some of these other running backs on the list.
And also, again, if we're focusing on peak, like Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson crossed 2,000 yards. I think, the peak seems to be sort of focused on touchdowns or, maybe all-purpose yards or whatever. But, something to – it's not easy to break 2,000 yards. There's not many running backs that have done it. And particularly, Adrian Peterson in 2012, that dude came off an ACL and racked up almost, a record-breaking level of yardage that year. That was absurd.
All right, let's go to fullback. PFF neglected fullback. and ESPN said it's Kyle Juszczyk. Again, just to go back to 2000, Sam, and reminisce a little bit. I remember they used to have these NFL Films Presents, and I thought they were Steve Sable, all the NFL Films things. I remember watching a special in the year 2000, I believe it was, heading into that year. It was one of those, what's the trend in the NFL right now? And the trend at the time was less pure fullback and more of the H-back. Let me introduce to you the H-back. It's not so much the 260-pound downhill fullback anymore. It's more of this guy that can line up on the wing and move around and create some mismatches. So this 25 years ago, Sam, the turn of the century, they were already starting to phase out the true fullback. They were still around for quite a while, right? You still saw a lot of teams but instead of having 32 teams with fullbacks, you just started to have fewer and fewer teams until there was like 3 teams actually putting a fullback out there for more than 300 snaps. But I thought it was fun that about 25 years ago, they were already talking about the H-back taking over as the new trend. And of course, we've seen that go full circle to where the fullback is almost extinct in today's NFL.
Yeah, so ESPN puts Kyle Juszczyk there. He's obviously the modern version. The problem is he's such a default option now that you can't. I don't think you can use things like Pro Bowls anymore because Juszczyk is he's the only fullback that plays. Yeah. So he gets default. Every year he's going to go to the Pro Bowl because he's one of like 4 fullbacks that plays any kind of snaps this year. So I think that warps the opinion of Kyle Juszczyk, right? And it will when you sort of go back and look relative to like other. So ESPN puts Juszczyk's 9 Pro Bowl selections of 4 more than Patrick Ricard and 5 more than Lorenzo Neal. But when Lorenzo Neal was playing, there were a lot of other fullbacks that were playing snaps. I don't think that's a fair comparison. And Lorenzo Neal to me is the obvious alternative here in that he's a fullback that blocked. Like he was a traditional fullback who was built like a rhinoceros, and his job was to plow through the line of scrimmage and open a lane for the running back running behind him.
Maybe that's why LaDainian Tomlinson didn't make it. They're giving Lorenzo Neal
it's all Lorenzo Neal
as the lead blocker. Let's go to receiver here. This one's fun. Okay, so PFF goes with their career PFF grades: Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, and Tyreek Hill. So again, this is going to go back to 2006. So you're going to miss a big chunk of, say, Marvin Harrison's career, because Marvin Harrison makes it, and you're missing a big chunk of Randy Moss's career. So ESPN's going to go Randy Moss.
Well, they missed most of the honestly, what I would say are the real contenders almost all get excluded by PFF's start date.
So ESPN has 6 receivers here. We got Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, and Justin Jefferson making the list, with the practice squad being Antonio Brown and Andre Johnson. You could see how loaded the receiver group is. I think any of those names are perfectly fine, but we could get very much into this debate of Justin Jefferson versus longevity or what have you. The first thing that stands out to me is Antonio Brown not making it and how underrated he is. He was right there. Like, there was a stretch of time this century where it was Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. And Julio Jones had slightly better per route efficiency. He was the yards per route run king, but he didn't play as much. And Antonio Brown is more of the volume king, not so much just like empty yards, but like Antonio Brown was unbelievable for an 8 to 10 year stretch. And I know everything that's happened since then, hasn't been great. But we're talking on-field play here. I wonder how much that is factoring in as well. Like, Antonio Brown should absolutely be on this list. He is right up there with Justin Jefferson, but for a longer period of time.
Yeah. So from PFF's point of view, the interesting thing I think is no Calvin Johnson, right? So that's the one all-time great receiver, quote unquote, that actually fits into their kind of grading years. Like Randy Moss misses a huge amount of his career. Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, like these, Torrey Holt, all these guys missed most of their career before PFF comes along. Not true for Calvin Johnson. You get the entirety of his career, and they've still decided that he's at least the 4th best receiver in that duration, largely based off, their grading. Meanwhile, ESPN's thing, I think, is Justin Jefferson making the list. I think both those things are wrong. Thoughts?
The other one for me is, so Marvin Harrison makes the list, and if we're talking peaks, we're just gonna get this thing going here. If we're talking peaks, let's not forget about Marvin Harrison and how good he was. I don't think you can mention Marvin Harrison without mentioning Jimmy Smith. I think they were comparable, and Marvin Harrison had Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning had Marvin Harrison. Jimmy Smith was QB proof. I thought maybe Brunell, my guy Mark Brunell was elevating him. But even when Byron Leftwich took over, it didn't matter. You still had incredible production from Jimmy Smith. But you're missing, like, there's not enough longevity in this century from Jimmy Smith. So I get it. I just have to mention Jimmy when I mention Marvin Harrison. The other name, though, that PFF having Tyreek Hill. And I can argue, I think Tyreek Hill's peak is up there in NFL history. I think it's up there with Randy Moss. I think it's up there with whatever stretch you want to say from Jerry Rice, whatever stretch you want to call it. I think Tyreek Hill, 5 or 6 year stretch, is as good as anybody's in history. As far as, and I don't know, I don't have the stats in front of me. I don't know where his statistical output lands for his best 5 or 6 years versus Jerry Rice versus Randy Moss. I'm just telling you, I think Tyreek Hill, of all the receivers in NFL history, could have done literally anything. Randy Moss, you want to say he's the best deep threat? Fine. But I think Tyreek Hill could have been a Randy Moss-like deep threat when they wanted. He also could have been a Wes Welker 130-catch slot receiver if you wanted. Randy Moss couldn't do that properly. You know what I mean? Like the skill set. So this is where you start to talk about talent. You had the Randy ratio year with, we're just going to feed Randy. Didn't go that well. Didn't go that well when you make Randy more of a possession receiver. Tyreek Hill could have been. I
don't think that's true.
It wasn't as good as it could have been. It wasn't the best way to use Randy Moss. My point here is Tyreek Hill could have been a top 3 high-volume possession receiver or a top 3 deep threat. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any other receiver on this list who could do both of those things. I think Tyreek Hill should be on this list somewhere.
I mean, okay. So first thing, I think you lose a bunch of these receivers when with the 2000 cutoff, right? So you brought up Jimmy Smith. You know, Jimmy Smith came into the league in the early 90s. Now, he lasted well into the 2000s, but you just lose too many years of his career.
You do.
To factor him. I think you lose too many years of Marvin Harrison's career as well, right? 96 was his rookie season. So you're losing 4 years before you even factor Marvin Harrison in. Randy Moss and Terrell Owens, 98. Terrell Owens might have been 96 as well, was he? But those two guys, number one, lasted a lot longer. And I think so. Even though you lose 4 years of Terrell Owens' career, he was still cooking for so many years after that. I think you can still count him in. And Randy Moss, you lose the first 2 years, but the rest of it was still insane. So I think both those guys still count and qualify. The one guy I think you can still factor in that hasn't been mentioned yet. And if we're talking about peaks, Torrey Holt, right? You only lose the crappiest year of Torrey Holt's career at the start of it. And he then went on a run that literally rivals any wide receiver in NFL history for like 5-6 years. If we're talking peaks, there's not a good argument to exclude Torrey Holt.
Torrey Holt is in that Jimmy Smith type of category. As you mentioned, Jimmy Smith's best, his 96 through 99 run was outstanding, where you could rank him among the league's best there. So you missed some of that. Torrey Holt's like a Jimmy Smith, where it's just underrated. There was another guy there, maybe not that Keenan McCardell or Isaac Bruce were taking all the shine, but it was like they were part of a 1-2 punch. But yeah, Torrey Holt was incredibly efficient and underrated, even when he was playing. And then when you go back and look at his numbers, leading the league in yards with over 1,600 twice. He led the league in 2000 with the Rams at 19. He had 82 catches for over 1,600 yards, 19.9 yards per reception. We talk about deep threats, almost 20 yards per reception at that kind of volume. Incredible career for Torrey Holt.
Yeah. I don't think I wouldn't put him in there either, because, I think those,
I wouldn't take anyone
I don't
else
think the
off,
peak thing is necessarily the best way of looking at it. The last thing I wanted to, the Randy Moss stuff, I think you're incorrect. He was just as good with a high volume underneath role as he was as the league's best deep threat. Earlier in his career, obviously he broke on the scene, like 17 touchdowns as a rookie, averaging like 20 yards a catch, was immediately the best deep threat in the NFL from like the second he stepped foot on the field. He was basically like that for the first 3-4 years of his career. And then teams focused on it. They decided to pivot in a different direction. In 2002, his average yards per catch went down to 12.7. He caught 106 passes for those 2 years, 2002, 2003. He topped 100 passes or 100 catches both times. Still had 1,300, 1,600 yards, had 24 touchdowns in those 2 years combined. He was just as devastating as an underneath possession Chris Carter clone receiver as he was the deep threat. That disappeared late in his career, but at his peak, Randy Moss could do everything.
Fair. Those were a good couple of years. Obviously, the production tapered off a little bit. His last year in Minnesota, battled injuries. Last year in Minnesota, a couple of years in Oakland, and then rejuvenated by going to the Patriots in 2007 when he had the 23 receiving touchdowns. So I think Moss is clearly on this list here. I see the chat with a healthy debate between Julio Jones and Calvin Johnson. Did you have something else?
Yeah, well, what do you do? So after the fact, right, now that the dust has settled a little bit, what do you do with Julio Jones' historic inability to score touchdowns? And have we actually come up with a reason why that was the case?
The best football reason I heard was about twitchiness and build-up speed. And what made Julio special was that like second gear that he had in his vertical routes, and that just was somewhat disappeared in the red zone. But because what Randy Moss did in the red zone and others, you just immediately equate size to, well, of course, this guy's going to be a great red zone threat. But Moss was in his own world as far as creating that late separation and using his body and everything that he did in short area spaces. I don't understand what happened with Julio because he had that on downfield passes, right? Yeah. He had the spectacular catch ability. He had the body control. He had the subtle late separation. Just never happened in short areas for whatever reason. And oh, by the way, like I'm on this dome quarterback kick, over the last few years. I think that's a factor. These receivers, Marvin Harrison playing in Indy with Peyton and Julio Jones in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, like that stuff helps as well. But I cannot figure out why Julio Jones was not a touchdown maker throughout his career.
But he also had 50? Like he had the other stuff that you would associate with touchdowns as well. Like there's one of his best plays is him literally mossing the Malcolm Butler in the back of the end zone. Like takes it from over the top of his head, turns as he's doing it to like rip it away from him. Like perfect sort of highlight reel red zone type of play. The catch that nobody, people remember but don't remember in that Super Bowl would have been one of the greatest catches in NFL history, except the game went away, right? Like that's Chris Carter-esque sideline body control, footwork ability. Like that's why Chris Carter caught 100 touchdowns, right? And Julio Jones could do that, but for some reason it didn't translate to a lot of touchdowns ever.
The guy that Julio Jones came into college and the NFL with in the SEC and then in the NFL with AJ Green. I don't think anyone ever thought AJ Green was as good as Julio Jones. He ends his career with 3,000 fewer receiving yards, but he had 4 more touchdowns in his regular season career. And AJ Green was a very good receiver for a while. But yeah, there was just something missing with Julio. And after he had 10 touchdowns in his second season, never had more than 8 after that.
The recency bias victims in this one are Larry Fitzgerald and probably Andre Johnson as the two.
So I struggle with Larry Fitzgerald because I think in my mind, I think he gets hurt. He gets hurt or helped by the longevity, depending on which way you slice it. So in my brain bias, the late career possession receiver guy is just like there was so many years of that where he had 3 straight years with over 100 catches, like 10 yards per catch, 11 yards per catch, right? He was just uber possession guy. Early in his career, though, he was your normal downfield threat. Like he was the high end, high volume possession type, but that not 10 yards per a pop, 13 or 14 yards per catch, but he could get down the field. He could create after the catch. The end of his career, he couldn't do any of that stuff. And it was all just short stuff, and he's dependable, and he's never going to drop a pass. And maybe somebody made up a stat about him having, what's the stat?
More tackles than drops in his NFL
More
career.
tackles than drops. I don't
Apparently.
even know
I don't know how reliable that stat is.
Yeah, I have no idea. Doesn't, but he had as good a hands as you've ever seen. I mean, even as a true, I also love the fact that I remember Larry Fitzgerald as a true freshman at Pittsburgh. I remember Julio and AJ Green as true freshmen. I mean, this was like immediately they looked special as soon as they stepped onto campus. That was Fitzgerald at Pitt. So he's kind of underrated in that I think his peak was very good. But for me, he's also overrated because I think a lot of his volume at the end of the career, like it's impressive, but he tacked on a lot of volume where guys like Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, those guys did not age into that possession type of receiver the way that Larry Fitzgerald did.
He also, in his favor, he had that incredible run to the Super Bowl in 08.
Yeah.
One of the greatest postseasons of all time as well. That stands in his stead. So, okay, let's do this. If we're doing this, you need 4 receivers for the last 25 years. Who are your 4?
We didn't even talk about Terrell Owens, but Owens being split into the 90s and 2000s maybe hurts him. But there was a point where it was Randy Moss and Terrell Owens as 1 and 2, and they did it differently. But you would say either of those 2 guys above everyone else. Maybe Marvin Harrison at the same time as well.
I mean, I think your 4 I think you're Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Calvin Johnson, and then I'm taking Julio, even though he never scored touchdowns, because I just don't believe that's a thing. Like, I know it was a thing, but I don't believe that was a critical flaw in his game. I think it's just some weird quirk of history.
So I'm definitely taking Randy Moss. I made my Tyreek Hill pitch, so I'll take Tyreek Hill. I think because of the era, we were debating Julio Jones versus Antonio Brown. I'll give Julio the edge, but I think that was close.
Right.
So I'll take those 3. And I don't feel great about the 4th.
So ESPN has Justin Jefferson there. I think that's as ridiculous as the Priest Holmes pick. Like, Justin Jefferson has been, as good as any receiver in NFL history through 5 years of their career. But it's been 5 years of their career. Like, how can you possibly argue that those 5 years are better than 10 or more from other Hall of Fame wide receivers? Like, this is arguing that Justin Jefferson's 5 years are better than Megatron's entire NFL career. I think that's insane.
Well, it's comparable. It's better than Andre Johnson or Antonio Brown. That's who they put on the practice squad. I also wouldn't go that way. Who's my 4? I don't know. Who's my 4th? Give me Megatron. We got to move on. Receivers, a good debate, though. Tight end, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, and Tony Gonzalez for ESPN. PFF has Gronk, highest graded career, and then George Kittle, which I think both are fair from an ESPN perspective. The practice squad gets Antonio Gates.
Yeah.
I don't have too many complaints here. I think there's Gronk and Kelce will go down as the 2 best pass catchers of this era. Tony Gonzalez, early 2000s, and then what he did, with the Chiefs and then with the Falcons, he had some longevity. He had the peak. I think all 3 of those are good. Antonio Gates, his peak was outstanding as well. I think those are the right 4 tight ends. I don't know if there's anyone else that should even be considered there, except, if Kittle puts together a few more years, there's a Kittle versus Kelce debate as far as, all around tight end versus pure pass catcher, but I'm fine with Kittle being a tick below the rest of these guys.
Yeah. I think it's those 4 for 3 spaces. I think Gonzalez and Gronk are the obvious 2, in my opinion. And then my debate would be between Gates and Kelce. Kelce's going to end up with this incredible longevity. Part of me kind of wonders, to what extent Antonio Gates paved the way for a Travis Kelce. The way, like, people give a lot of. I'm never sure if this is true, if this is a valid reason or not. But people like pioneers, right? This guy changed the game. There's like inherent virtue to that. I don't know if that's just luck, but does Travis Kelce have the career that he's had if it wasn't for Antonio Gates?
Gates paved the way for power forward. Let's be serious here. Every single big-bodied power forward. It's like, this guy could give him a shot on the gridiron.
Maybe Mo Alley Cox can be a Hall of Famer.
Yes. I was watching some highlights the other day, once again, trying to get out of our recency bias brain. Antonio Gates late in his career wasn't moving all that well. He was never like a huge body, but he played huge, right? He played like a basketball player. But I was watching some old highlights when Drew Brees was still with the Chargers, and there was an overtime comeback where they just hit Antonio Gates in the flat, and he just outruns the entire defense. That was 2 or 3 years into his career. But man, he was fast and quick, and he had the just pure use your body skills down the field.
Even late in his career, he was such a savvy route runner. Like he developed the Algie Crumpler body by that point, but he was still so smart with how he like faked people, how he was able to move guys around. Like that's the thing. That's where him and Kelsey are, similar, right? They're both so smart with how they set up defenders and how they break open, even when they've lost, the physical specialness that made them so dominant at their peak.
Let's go off. Anything else on tight end? That was pretty straightforward.
No, I think that's simple. Like you've got 4 guys, I think, really for 3 spots, and it's just who you want to leave out.
All right, let's go offensive line because, look, ESPN, what they should have referenced. Aaron Schatz been at this for a while. He never really had any offensive line metrics to use. ESPN has most recently added some offensive line metrics with their pass rush, pass blocking win rate, run blocking win rate. They've using NGS data only the last few years. This is one where I think they should have leaned on PFF. I think they still got to some pretty good answers here. But starting at left tackle, Joe Thomas and Trent Williams. PFF has Joe Thomas as the highest graded left tackle with Trent Williams as honorable mention. So left tackle is the same for both. I think that makes sense for both players.
Yeah, this is one where the 2000 cutoff loses a whole bunch of possible candidates, right? So if you were other great Hall of Fame caliber tackles that played in this century for a big chunk of their career include Jonathan Ogden, Walter Jones, Orlando Pace, all of whom are sort of rivaling those guys as like best elite, top level offensive tackles, but all of whom lose 3 or 4 years to the 90s, right? Like Jonathan Ogden was 96. Jones and Pace, I think, were both 97. So they're losing 3 years, 4 years. Whereas Joe Thomas, you have the entirety of his career, and his career was pretty spectacular. So, yeah, I think it probably ends up being Joe Thomas as much because of that as anything else.
It is cool that we have Joe Thomas's entire career of PFF grading. Joe Thomas was always your like light-footed, pass blocking left tackle, was never really a dominant run blocker, though he was perfectly fine. But when you describe Joe Thomas, you would just say best pass blocker in the NFL. That's his thing. Every other guy that he's competing with, whether it's Trent Williams or the players you mentioned, Ogden, Walter Jones, Orlando Pace, they all had reputations as mauling run blockers too. And not just reputations, of course. We've got the grading for Trent Williams, which backs that up. So they're different styles. Joe Thomas was kind of like your quintessential pass blocking left tackle. All those other guys that he would be competing with, though, better run blockers, I think. We don't have the data to back it up, but just eye test wise, that would be a slight difference. But I'm still good with Joe Thomas being the number 1 guy here.
Other names that I would throw in there, at least for mentioning, Tyron Smith, Joe Staley, Jason Peters, Andrew Whitworth, I think would all at least be in the conversation.
And Peters has the longevity aspect. He's got peak plus longevity, just sticking around the league, being our age and the whole deal. Left guard, PFF has Logan Mankins as the highest career PFF grade, and the great Evan Mathis, honorable mention. A hot button issue in the early PFF days because no one had Evan Mathis ranked as one of the best guards in the NFL, except PFF did. And we always tried to explain that he's a great zone blocker. I mean, there's a whole story. I mean, in the PFF lore, as the for employees number 4 and 6, you and I, Evan Mathis is as important a player as anyone, isn't he? Because we were the only ones saying that he was good, and we had reasons for it, and the whole deal. We could talk about him in a second, but ESPN has gone Alan Faneca and Steve Hutchinson as the 2 left guards here. Discuss.
Hutchinson, I think, is the clear, obvious, definite guy. Faneca is interesting. I would love to have PFF data on Faneca for his entire career. We caught, PFF, First one of those for a while.
Wow.
No, the tail end of
Sam, when you say we and you're referring to the past tense, that's legal. If you're saying we now, if you say we because you're putting yourself into the headspace of when I was there at this time, you're saying we. That's legal.
Well, I think it's a gray area because that's certainly why it happens, but I'm not sure it makes it acceptable. Anyway.
That said, be sure to, we're not at PFF anymore. Be sure to subscribe to Check the Mic. This show right here, this is Check the Mic via 33rd Team. Carry on.
Yeah. PFF only caught the tail end of Faneca's career. But there's this fuzzy period of time where this one I think works. We collectively, by that I mean me, Ben Stockwell, Neil Hornsby, the original PFF kind of core people, weren't yet PFF, but we're still like in-depth hardcore football nerds that were sort of more paying attention to offensive line than other people, right?
Yeah.
So there's this weird crossover period where we don't really have grading on it, but I think we were better clued in than like Pro Bowls, right? And even during that period, it didn't feel like Faneca was actually as good as his reputation. And he's one of those players where I think it would be fascinating to know how much of his career was a product of that. You get the rep early, you play for the Steelers, storied franchise, they do a good job of promoting those offensive linemen. And then you just kind of ride that gravy train to however many Pro Bowls he had. Like, what did he have? End up 9 Pro Bowls, right? I don't know how good Faneca was. I'm sure he was good, but I don't know if he was like one of the greatest guards of all time good.
And 6-time All-Pro. And for, that's for people that don't know all that. If you look historically in the number of offensive linemen who spend 3 or 4 years in the league, and then they get the reputation and they get the first team All-Pro, and then they get the next 6. Like, that's just how it goes. Like, as soon as you start to get the All-Pro votes, as long as you stay healthy, you're pretty much getting it. You think the 50 AP voters in the 90s and early 2000s were grinding guard film when they have a week to put this list together at the end of covering a team? Like, that's just not happening. It was all based off reputation, and you'd get some talk to players and talk to coaches, but it was very much reputation driven. PFF came in and said, okay, we're actually gonna chart this thing and give you pluses and minuses and give you positives and negatives when you do well and when you don't do well. And good players have bad games, good players have bad seasons, not so good players have great seasons. Like, different stuff happens. The Evan Mathis
now, like the All-Pro stuff now matches up a lot better with PFF grades than it ever did. In the past, like way in the past, like I think PFF has had an impact in how offensive linemen get given All Pros, et cetera, et cetera. So like, Faneca is the interesting one to me. I think Hutchinson's nailed on.
And I know we've said this a bunch on the show, and I know some, the offensive line people, a lot of them still hate PFF grades, but because I trust them more because I know how they're made, but I don't trust them to the point where you say, and I never did, this guy's a 90.2. This guy's an 89.7, give me the 90.2. It's not that detailed where you just take it, as a vertical list and then end it. But when you take, 4 or 5 players are in the same ballpark, you say, well, this guy's role was more difficult and this guy had a harder strength of schedule. You start to separate them with context. The Evan Mathis story, just because it's a fun story though, for years we were the ones defending him, and he was a part-time player with the Bengals. And he'd always grade well. And we kept, he was one of those guys that we would push and say, this guy deserves more playing time. He goes to the Eagles. He's in a zone-heavy scheme, and he was really good by PFF data. But even at the time, there were other guards around the league who had a little bit more power and strength and finish. And, they would wreck people off the ball or whatever it may have been that still got hyped up a little bit more than Evan Mathis. But I explained this to Chip Kelly, future PFF investor. And even he was asking, like, why'd you guys love Evan Mathis? I said, well, he didn't lose in the system. He just didn't have a whole lot of losses. He didn't have a lot of high, crazy wins or dominant blocks. The guy just didn't lose. And however you want to value that. So that was how we viewed Evan Mathis for a big chunk of time. And that's why he's on that PFF list as an honorable mention. He always graded extremely well. He was a good pass protector, but from a run game perspective, the guy just rarely lost in what he was asked to do.
He was such a perfect case study in like the philosophical differences between some of the NFL and PFF, because the PFF system rewarded that consistency, not losing, a series of small, solid wins over and over and over again. Whereas what the NFL was always chasing was, show me the guy that's got the highlight reel block, the Michael Oher blocking a guy into the bleachers. Like, find me the guy that can do that, right? And so there was a period of time where he was splitting time. He was like rotating at guard, which is insane in and of itself. But he was rotating at guard for the Bengals with Nate Livings. And Nate Livings was that guy who had some highlight reel blocks, who could bury a dude every now and again, but he got his ass kicked regularly. And so, like, Evan Mathis was grading exceptionally well. Nate Livings was not. Nate Livings ends up being the guy to get, the big money free agent deal for Dallas. Evan Mathis ends up having a sign for like this small, modest deal with Philadelphia. It somehow actually almost lucks into a starting gig there. And then he was the one that went on to prove he was like the high quality, all pro caliber, high end guard. And Nate Livings basically bombed out of his time in Dallas and was not a starter after that much longer. So like the perfect case study of like, there's something of value here in this PFF grading system that was telling you all along, this was the better guy. And instead you as coaches effectively and personnel people chased the inconsistent upside, and it didn't work out.
All right, this is going to be a fun one. Let's go center. PFF has Nick Mangold as the highest rated center of the PFF era, basically 95 plus PFF grade. Jason Kelce, honorable mention. ESPN, Sam, speaking of hot button names through the years, Jason Kelce, number 1. And the one other center that they mention in their write-up is Steelers legend Maurkice Pouncey.
Yeah. I think
like people forget how good Nick Mangold was.
Yes, that's the thing. I think PFF is smart to recognize Nick Mangold. I think, again, like, this is why I don't think ESPN is applying their own sort of, this is why the criteria sounded wishy-washy in the first place. Like, we're going to focus on peak, but also reward longevity. It's like, well, you can't, how can you do both those things at the same time? Nick Mangold's peak was insane. Like, he was elite, dominant, fit every scheme. And I don't know how much you want to factor that in as well. Like, what if you took Jason Kelce and plugged him into an old school gap system at 280 pounds? Like, he was very scheme specific, right? He was perfect for that scheme. But I don't know, like, Nick Mangold could work in any system in the NFL and would have been a monster. But Kelce's had the longevity. He's been spectacular for longer. I think those are the right two names.
Yes, they are. The Pouncey thing, he was another one of the hot button ones where we had interactions with Steelers fans and even maybe the coaches. I mean, even maybe people in the front office. They thought Maurkice Pouncey was outstanding, and the grading never really matched that. Both from a pass protection standpoint, he'd give up a few more pressures than other top centers. He may have been left on an island a few more times because they had such high regard for him. So again, context matters. I don't think he was quite the people mover at the point of attack at center. Certainly not that a Mangold was, but even some other centers at that time. The other thing I'll say. Jason Kelce was this very clear zone blocking center, right? You could pull him out into space, but he was going to make your reach blocks. He was going to make the reach block is the flashy block for me for the center, right? Where it's incredible quickness and get off and, getting in position. And when you make the block, you steal a gap in the run game. Kelce was great at that. Remember, Chris Myers was the perfect Shanahan zone center doing that. So the PFF system, I think, would highlight those types of players, maybe a tick more than the players who did a little bit of both. And I think that's where Pouncey landed. So I don't know if the system hurt him a little bit, but I also just think he wasn't as good as the perception because there was decades of Steelers center lore that he stepped into.
And that's the thing, like the Maurkice Pouncey Steelers dynamic, the publicity machine there. That's what makes me just a little bit twitchy about Alan Faneca. Like, I think both of them were good players, but I think they were immediately anointed by the Steelers sort of PR offensive line machine because they'd had this run of incredible players on the offensive line. They were very good at like, oh, this guy's the next one right out of the can. And they got this reputation, and the reputation sustained them even when the play wasn't there. And for Pouncey's career, at least all the way along, you had a PFF to be like, at least provide another perspective. For Faneca, that wasn't there. So that just said, that got allowed to go completely unchecked with nobody actually testing out whether he was playing at that level or not. So I think he was a good player, but I don't know if he was one of the best two guards of the last 25 years. Other centers that should be at least mentioned. You mentioned one of them, Chris Myers, is totally forgotten about now. That dude is a monster as a zone blocking center. Kevin Mawai, Olin Kreutz as two old school centers as well.
Love it. Well done. Right guard, ESPN has Zach Martin and Marshall Yanda. We'll have some.
Last one. Alex Mack as well as a center.
Alex Mack had a really nice career for sure. PFF has Marshall Yanda and then Zach Martin. ESPN has it flipped. So Marshall Yanda, highest PFF grade at right guard. Zach Martin got honorable mention. ESPN went with them as a 1-2 punch. Zach Martin and then Marshall Yanda. And practice squad is Jari Evans. I think we both agree Zach Martin and Marshall Yanda. You could tell the Yanda story as well and how special we thought he was.
Yeah, I think those are the right two names. Was Jari Evans the right guard for the Saints? Why do I have him on the other side in my head?
I thought
he was. It was Carl Nix on the left.
Yeah.
I had them, for some reason in my brain, those two have swapped sides of the line.
I messed that up a lot too in my brain, so don't feel bad. The Yanda story was when we went back and did 07? Was that his rookie season? He was playing right tackle for the Ravens and still graded extremely well as a right tackle. You don't see that. We just saw Joe Tooney, what he did, right? And when we make these references, that sticks out in our brain, what Yanda did early in his career.
Yeah, I mean, Marshall Yanda was an 8-time Pro Bowler. I think he could have been the same thing at right tackle. Like, I honestly, he's a classic example of a guy who was just sort of slated to kick inside, to guard, but early in his career, they needed him at right tackle, and he played well enough at that spot that I think if you'd let him stay at right tackle, he would have been just as good as he was at guard. He went in, he became a Hall of Fame caliber guard. You might have been looking at a Hall of Fame caliber tackle as well. Yanda was just spectacular. Those are the correct two names, I think. Yeah, Jari Evans, if you were going to throw in an honorable mention, but like those are the two that you would put in there.
I'm looking ahead for a second here. I just realized one of the names that's missing here. I didn't realize it earlier. We'll get there. Good right guards, Aaron and Seth. Right tackle, ESPN's gone Lane Johnson and Willie Anderson. Our friend, Willie Anderson. I'm part of the Willie Anderson propaganda for the Hall of Fame machine. I'm part of the machine. Right tackle for PFF is Lane Johnson with an honorable mention to Mitchell Schwartz. Schwartz was a friend. He's not a friend of the show yet, but just a friend of us generally. Mitchell always graded very well for PFF. I think that's why he likes PFF historically. But yeah, Lane Johnson, top career grade among right tackles. ESPN has Lane, and then Willie. PFF only had a couple years of Willie Anderson's career, but they were good. And he's been fighting to try to get into the Hall of Fame. But right tackles in the 90s and early 2000s were not hyped up. And the biggest thing working against Willie is all pros and Pro Bowls.
Yeah.
And founder Neil Horn. Neil is also with me on the propaganda team for Willie. And Neil did a lot of research. Like, there was this revolving door of first-team All-Pro right tackles, which directly coincided with the team's record, right? So I forget who it was with the Bears. Like, the Bears win 12 games in 2001. And it's like their right tackle gets All-Pro because they won all the games. That's how crazy it is to use All-Pros and Pro Bowls, because that's how they did it back then.
Well, there was a period of time where they didn't have left and right? They just had tackles. And so the left tackles were always the ones that were going. Then they actually did right tackles, but as you said, it was tied to record. The other thing that doesn't help him is in this as well, he loses a chunk of his career to the 90s. He crosses over the decade, so he doesn't make the all-decade teams. Certainly didn't make it for the 2000s. I haven't checked the 90s one. Maybe you made that one. But that. So I think Willie Anderson's a Hall of Fame caliber right tackle. My question would be, does he lose enough of his career that you put in a guy like Mitchell Schwartz instead?
All right, I was mistaken. I didn't scroll down enough. We're on the defensive side of the ball here. Again, check the mic, hit that subscribe button, stick with us. We're having fun this offseason here, talking listicles.
We are
quarter century team.
We're over 48,000 subscribers. Let's get to 50. Let's hit that 50 mark.
Let's get to 50 by the time we get into the studio. July 28th. We're aiming about a month right now to kick things off from the studio. We're going to go by there today, check it out. We're starting to get the furniture in, starting to build the actual set in the studio. But yeah, we're aiming for, kicking off this season right around training camp for 2025. So I thought they forgot J.J. Watt, but I had to scroll down. They gave him his own section, which is good. He's a versatile defensive lineman. We'll talk about that in a second. For pure edge rushers, ESPN has gone DeMarcus Ware, Jared Allen, Myles Garrett, and Julius Peppers with honorable mentions to TJ Watt and Michael Strahan. PFF at edge, where did they go? Von Miller and Myles Garrett as the two with an honorable mention to Khalil Mack. They had Watt on the interior of the defensive line, so we'll talk about him in a second. Let's start with edge. What are your thoughts on ESPN's list here?
Yeah, so this is interesting because there's a bunch of them over that period of time. What's also interesting to me is that if you look at all decade teams, some of the names are flipped, like they've gone the other way. Like Michael Strahan was the first team 2000s defensive end, and Julius Peppers was second team. Dwight Freeney misses the list entirely. Dwight Freeney was first team all 2000s, all decade team that year. This is tough because I think Peppers had a ton of longevity. That's a big part of his career. Obviously, Strahan ends up getting, he didn't get to the record, right? He got close. Called it a career before that. But like, these are some of the best pass rushers of all time.
Yeah. It is really tough to separate those. The Julius Peppers one was interesting. I don't know if he ever, from a PFF perspective, did he ever have truly dominant seasons? Like during our time at PFF, there was a stretch where it was Von Miller, right from as a rookie. It was Von Miller and Khalil Mack for the better part of the last decade as the top two guys. J.J. Watt when he became an edge, but again, he's played both, which makes him his own case. I don't know if Peppers ever truly had the PFF domination, the down for down win domination. He always had massive sack totals, and of course, when you can talk talent a little bit more at this position than say quarterback, because it's like, what does he do to the defense? What does he do to the offense? How does he affect things? Like Peppers could do a lot. He also had 11 career interceptions, right? You just don't see, like he'd just have some of those special plays. TJ Watt has some of that as well. But Peppers and Jared Allen, maybe from an efficiency standpoint, a tick below from what we've seen from Myles Garrett and guys like Von Miller.
By the way, one question you would have to sort of answer. So, if you're doing ESPN's job of like, we're building a 53-man roster here, how would you even designate them? Like, because this is like, we're in the period of the last 25 years where things started to muddy. We used to have old school 3-4s, old school 4-3s, and they were very different systems and very different styles of player. PFF from very early on was like a 4-3 defensive end is effectively a 3-4 outside linebacker. They're both edge rushers. But now you've gotten this over the last 25 years, it's all homogenized, right? Everyone plays effectively the same defense because everyone's in sub packages the whole time. The alignment is the same, whether you got your hand in the dirt or whether you're standing up. Not that many people are really dropping into coverage in a serious way anymore anyway. So, like, how would you even designate these anymore?
I'd probably just lump them together, even if the roles are different. But remember, like Von Miller early in his career was playing in a 4-3. Like they actually had him playing 4-3 Sam linebacker on early downs. And then he was just a true pass rusher. There was a lot of teams that did that, right? The Sam linebacker was also your pass rusher. Then you have teams like the Steelers that were the true 3-4 outside backers where they just stayed on the same side. And that's what they did. The hand in the dirt versus standing up, it has morphed into something similar. Despite the schemes now.
Jason Taylor was a guy that was on the 2000s all-time list. He misses, I think he he loses enough years to the 90s that I think you can cut him out. Dwight Freeney is the guy that I think suffers from recency bias, though. Like Freeney, I think he's a classic example of it feels like you needed to be there to get Freeney, right? If you look back now and you're looking at it in terms of, sacks, where he ranks on the sack kind of all-time list, et cetera, like he's 27th behind Von Miller already, behind all these other guys that we're talking about, Jared Allen, Terrell Suggs, DeMarcus Ware, Jason Taylor, Strahan. He's behind all those guys. And yet I don't know that any of those guys inspired the kind of pure fear into an offensive tackle that Dwight Freeney did. His peak of pass rushing scariness was unrivaled, I think, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me kind of like the Adrian Peterson discussion, though, because Freeney was never a great run defender. That was his reputation. But it was also, that's how the Colts played, right? They were like, hey, we're going to get a lead, and then we're just going to, him and Mathis are just going to get upfield and chase the quarterback. And so that's never going to show up from a run defense perspective, whether you're talking about just pure tackles or taking on blocks. So he's never doing that when Julius Peppers at 6'7", 295. I mean, that's the thing that's working in Peppers' favor, is he was always this freak athlete and also, had good production as well and felt like a better all-around player. Jared Allen was probably closer to Freeney than he was Peppers as far as run game reputation, I think. I don't know if he was a special run defender, but pure pass rusher. I think Von Miller is the guy that gets lost in the mix here. Because Von Miller, right off the get-go, in 2011 as a rookie, is a dominant pass rusher. And then he's got two of the very best playoff runs we've ever seen, right? 2015 with the Broncos, 2021 with the Rams. Von Miller's the one that's getting overrated, underrated here from ESPN, and that they're missing. Von Miller, for about a 10-year stretch, was the first or second best edge rusher in the league, or, debated in that mix. And he did it in the playoffs. And all of the defending that we've done for Myles Garrett through the years, like the guy just wins one-on-ones and this and that, whatever. But maybe, like, for as dominant as Myles Garrett's down for down production is, you should see more 15 to 20 sack seasons from Myles Garrett. But you had that from Von Miller, and you had that in crunch time. So it was kind of this hybrid between high volume winner of a Garrett, but also great finisher like a TJ Watt. He was kind of a hybrid between those two. I think Von Miller absolutely should be on this list.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Like, it's another one of these, the Mahomes versus Aaron Rodgers thing. Like, can you say that Myles Garrett's career is already better than the totality of Von Miller's career? And I don't think you can. I also don't think you can say the peaks were better either. Even though he's had his peaks now, I don't know that I'm holding him particularly responsible for the relative lack of sacks relative to some of these other guys. But the point is, there's another candidate there that's got all those things. So I think Jared Allen was a better run defender, certainly, than Dwight Freeney, and a pretty good run defender overall.
Vaughn, by the way, and Vaughn was an elite run defender.
Yes,
so that's what I'm adding.
But very good.
Yes, in a different way, but he was an elite run defender for the first 8-9 years of his career. Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I think Von Miller deserves to be on the list. Khalil Mack would at least be in the discussion as well, based off his career has been pretty spectacular. I think Allen deserves to be there. I think DeMarcus Ware deserves to be there. Julius Peppers, then I think it gets muddy. Like, I think those two guys are definitely there. Then I think you're like Myles Garrett, Von Miller deserves to be there. I think that's 3. But then it's like Julius Peppers, Michael Strahan, TJ Watt, Khalil Mack, Dwight Freeney. If you want to exclude Dwight Freeney because of run defense, fair enough, but his pass rushing is pretty devastating.
There's so many.
How much of John Abraham? You get the whole of John Abraham's career. He's an underrated, forgotten about dude.
He's underrated, but it's really tough to put him in this mix. He was the year 2000. He came in 2000 in that right with the Jets. They had the 4 draft picks in 2000.
Yes.
Him, Anthony Beck, Sean Ellis.
John Abraham has like 5 more career sacks than Von Miller does.
Does he?
Yeah.
He was an elite run defender. I mean, what's Vaughn at 130?
129.5.
Oh, that half sack, but he's got over 130, including the playoffs, per PFF. Yeah.
Who else were we missing? Terrell Suggs is a guy that has a shit ton of sacks that we haven't talked about.
And he's known for his run defense.
Yeah.
It was a good pass rusher. I mean, I might put Suggs. I guess Allen was pretty good. I guess Peppers might be the one that I think, I hate saying it, but is slightly overrated relative to some of the other guys.
Right. Allen was interesting. Like, I think there's something to all-time great players just it looking different, from day one. And you talked about it with some of those guys. You could see it in college. The Vikings had swung and missed at edge rusher for years. They kept drafting these guys, Erasmus James, Kelechi Adesi in the first round. All of them were terrible. And then eventually they just went, screw it. And they traded multiple first-round picks to Kansas City for Jared Allen. And he fixed it like a switch. Just immediately came in, was one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, was a good run defender. But like they had kept trying to find these players. They eventually traded a boatload of stuff to the Chiefs, and Jared Allen just immediately done. Problem solved.
All right. The chat's asking me who would I put in there. So if we're putting JJ Watt in his own world.
Yeah.
Like
who could also just be an edge rusher, by the way.
I mean, that's why he's in his own world, because he was an elite edge rusher and an elite interior defensive lineman in the 3-4. That's unbelievable. I would take out Julius Peppers and put in Von Miller on this ESPN list. I'm fine with Myles Garrett, Jared Allen, DeMarcus Ware. I'm fine with Freeney being out on the fringe and TJ Watt and Strahan being just out. I would put Von Miller and leapfrog him over Julius Peppers on their list. So Garrett, Allen, Ware, and Von Miller.
Okay.
For 10-year stretch, he was the best all around. He wasn't JJ Watt, but he was like a tick below JJ Watt. Aaron, defensive tackle. ESPN's got out. I know PFF has Aaron Donald. Right, where are they? They went out of order. They go Aaron Donald and JJ Watt. So they called JJ Watt interior defensive line. They go honorable mention Chris Jones. ESPN has gone Aaron Donald, Calais Campbell, and Chris Jones as their 3 defensive tackles, with a practice squad of Kevin Williams and Cameron Hayward. They separated nose tackles, by the way, where Vince Wilfork got the nod. And then, as I said, they gave J.J. Watt their own versatile defensive lineman category. So Aaron Donald, Calais Campbell, Chris Jones, 3 defensive tackles for ESPN.
Yeah, so Chris Jones, pretty interesting one, given how much he's played, relative to some of these other guys. He's 30 years old now. When did he come into the league? 2015?
Say Jones?
Yeah.
16.
I
believe so.
So,
16.
I struggle to put him in over some of these other guys. This is an interesting one though, because I think recency bias kicks in a major way here. Like, this is one position where I think we're all focusing on the guys that have either played a long time or have played yesterday.
So who else? We forget how good. So Aaron Donald, I think, is the clear guy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go back, I mean, you're putting him in the all-time greats as far as when you mentioned Reggie White and Bruce Smith and like the best of all time, Lawrence Taylor, J.J. Watt's in that mix, best defensive player of all time. Like, he's in that discussion. He's in that echelon of the Hall of Fame. Calais Campbell is still going and is still good. I mean, the longevity thing helps him, but he's also had some really good peaks. He's another guy that had peaks in like he played end in the Seattle, 4-3 system. So he's moved around a little bit. He interesting career too, because he started kind of slow his first 3 or 4 years with Arizona, and then he became an elite player for about 10 years. But there was never a point where you were ranking Calais Campbell. There was never a point where Calais Campbell was really like overtaking that coveted second best defensive tackle spot in the league, right? Chris Jones, Cameron Hayward, Fletcher Cox. We debated a lot of those other players. We never really did that with Campbell. So he's kind of, I think, benefiting from the longevity, but also he's just been very, very good for a long time. I don't mind Chris Jones being on this list, but yeah, you might be losing some early 2000s defensive tackles.
I think you definitely are. I mean, look, First of all, yeah, Calais Campbell. There have been a couple of defensive tackles or interior guys, Calais Campbell, Cameron Hayward, who their best play have come after the age of 30. Like 30, used to be off or defensive linemen hitting 30. You're like, the decline's coming. Calais Campbell, Cameron Hayward, those guys have been playing their best ball since the age of 30. So it's slightly weird position that way. I think you're definitely losing some. Like, I don't know that you can put Chris Jones in there above Kevin Williams. Can you put him in ahead of Richard Seymour as a guy that everyone forgets about now and was an absolute dominant force? Has he had a better career already than Geno Atkins? Has he had a better career already than Fletcher Cox? Maybe, but I don't know that that's definitely the case.
Who else from the early? I'm trying to remember. We caught the tail end of John Randall, but that was too late.
So you lose, the 2000s team, you lose Warren Sapp to the 90s. You lose Leroy Glover to the 90s. Richard Seymour was in there. Kevin Williams was second team that decade.
Trevor Price. Is he good enough for a while now?
No.
I'm looking at like early 2000s sack lists here. With respect
to Trevor.
No offense to Trevor Price. Just looking
Vonnie
at the 01 list. Vonnie Holiday, John Henderson. There's some good defensive tackles. I don't know. I think Chris Jones is fine. I mean, I don't mind that. I mean, people might forget how good the Williams wall was with Pat playing nose tackle and then Kevin as the classic.
How many years of
Pat's
career do you lose?
He was 03. He was the
No, Pat, not Kevin.
Oh, Pat? Oh, he was a big chunk of the 90s. He played. He didn't become like a big name until Minnesota, but
right.
He was drafted in 97. So he was part of the Bills had a pretty loaded defensive line. He was on the same team as Ted Washington for a bit, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Imagine running against that.
But he didn't become a big name until the early 2000s with Minnesota, where you could not run on those guys.
Yeah. The big ones, I think, are those two, Kevin Williams and Richard Seymour.
I'm good with Chris Jones being here, but I don't know. Fletcher Cox peak was pretty good. Geno Atkins peak was
was spectacular. Yeah. And how many years was that?
4 or 5 years. I think he was up there. How about this name? Early PFF name for us, Justin Smith. So
it's like, what do you call him?
So Justin Smith, he got drafted by the Bengals, number 4 overall. I think it was a surprise pick at the time. And he was a 4-3 defensive end early in his career. And then the early PFF years were grading Justin Smith as a 3-4 defensive end in the 49er system. And he was before Aaron Donald, before J.J. Watt, I should say, he was the perennial top 3-4 defensive end before J.J. Watt hit the scene, to the point where Justin Smith set like the early standard for PFF guy that you're going to push higher than maybe the public. Justin Smith was one of the early poster children for that, much like an Evan Mathis. And Justin Smith. And then remember, Sam, when we went back to start grading 06, he was still with the Bengals and he was playing pure 4-3 defensive end, and he was good there too. I mean, Justin Smith was just a good all-around player. I don't know if he's making all-century team, but another guy across 2 different positions that was really productive.
Chris Jenkins Sr. would be an interesting name in there.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I don't have major issues with Donald, Calais Campbell, and Chris Jones. I don't know who else I'd put above Chris Jones. Maybe I'd have to debate Fletcher Cox, Geno Atkins, Kevin Williams. Maybe Kevin Williams. Wish we had more.
Kevin Williams was a beast. I think Geno Smith is the guy. Geno
Ndamukong Suh. The chat mentions Ndamukong Suh.
Yeah, I don't think Ndamukong Suh ever actually lived up to his potential, or maybe not potential, reputation coming into the NFL. I don't think he ever really became the force he was supposed to.
I think he was hurt from a PFF sense. He was hurt because of his volume. I mean, Aaron Donald had the volume too, but Suh would play 800-900 snaps every single year. And I think Allen had that. Jaron Allen had some of that too, where he'd play 1,000 snaps, and it hurts your down-to-down efficiency that shows up from a grading sense. But I'm with you overall. Like, Suh was a very, very good player. was the highest paid player for a minute for Miami, but I don't think he was ever that dominant. Gerald McCoy, actually, remember they came in 2 and 3 overall. Yeah. Gerald McCoy had a short stretch where he was probably more dominant than Sue, but Sue had the longevity much better than McCoy.
Yeah, no, McCoy's a good name to shout out as well. I think Aaron Donald is the clear number one. If I was picking 2 more, I would think I would have. Yeah, it would be 3 from Chris Jones, Kevin Williams, Geno Atkins. 2 from those 3.
All right. ESPN's nose tackles, Vince Wilfork with a mention to Casey Hampton. The decade started with a handful of teams playing the true 3-4. The Steelers and Patriots were 2 of those teams. Remember, there was that famous Vince Wilfork goes like 19th overall or whatever it was, and it was one of those, Belichick's bobbing while everyone else is weaving. No one else is picking the same types of players, so he gets his choice of the prototypical 5 techniques, Richard Seymour and Ty Warren. He gets his choice of the prototypical nose tackle, Vince Wilfork. Then the league started to morph back into more 3-4, and you started to see Jamal Williams showing up in San Diego as a 3-4 nose tackle. He had Casey Hampton. So more of the league started to go to like the big 3-4. But yeah, Vince Wilfork, kind of a prototypical nose tackle type, as was Hampton at the turn of the century. Now, of course, we've hyped up Dexter Lawrence a ton, and has he put up enough of a resume to at least get his name mentioned here?
Oh, nose tackle, I think, is a nightmare for the 21st century, because you have all those guys from the start that you've got Casey Hampton. Maybe you lose enough of their careers of Jamal Williams and Pat Williams to exclude them, if you even include Pat Williams as a true nose tackle, because he was a 1 tech as opposed to in a 4-man front, as opposed to a 0 technique in a 3-man front where you line up head up over the nose. I mean, you've got guys like Kelly Gregg for Baltimore. Dexter Lawrence, I think, is absolutely in that conversation. Who else was I thinking belongs in the nose tackle discussion? Snacks, Damon Harrison.
There was a stretch where Damon Harrison was the best run defender in the NFL 4 or 5 years ago.
Big stretch, like for years.
I'm looking at the best. So if you go 2007 PFF, the best run defending defensive tackles. Now that's 3 techniques and nose tackles, but here are the names. Jamal Williams was number 1, pure nose tackle in San Diego. Albert Hainsworth was number 2. This was one of his breakout seasons. Not a pure nose tackle. Pat Williams, though, nose tackle. Sean Rogers playing the nose. Chris Jenkins, who you mentioned earlier. Vince Wilfork. Haloti Ngata is up there. Sione
You could argue
Pua.
Ngata's in that bucket.
Ngata could be in there, but he's kind of like Sue for me, where I think there were peaks and there was always this like, what could he do? This guy's 340 pounds.
He's more like Vita Vea, right? It's like, I think he's like better than Vita Vea, but same idea.
And Ngata had a really nice career, but so much of his career was like, look at this 340-pounder playing stand-up linebacker and doing all this cool stuff, but it never showed up in his absolute dominant production.
And same as Vea in that regard, in that you think of him as a nose tackle and he actually wasn't.
Right. He was playing all over the place. So yeah, like I'm good with Wilfork and Hampton, but I mean, there were stretches where there were other nose tackles probably better, and then none of these nose tackles we're mentioning were actual sack artists, like or pressure creators as far as rushing the passer goes. They weren't. That just wasn't their game. That's what makes Dexter Lawrence so special. There was a point where Marcel Darius was being used as a 1-tech nose tackle, and he was, I think, maybe the one guy that would give you that 6 to 8 sack season, that high pressure type of season from the nose. I can't remember if I'm forgetting anyone else in that mix, but Dexter's in his own world with that.
I think you have to put Dexter Lawrence on there because of what he's doing right now, which is an order of magnitude different from anything we've seen from anybody playing nose tackle in terms of rushing the passer, and he's a good run defender as well. I would be really interested. This is another one where I wish PFF's grading extended another few years. I would love to see those first couple of years of Vince Wilfork's career and then directly compare him to Snacks Harrison, because Harrison had a longer period of being elite against the run, but maybe we missed the first couple of years of grading of Vince Wilfork's career because the first 2 years in terms of PFF grades were the best.
So Damon Harrison is a rookie in 2012, barely plays, comes out of William Penn. From 2013 to 18, he goes to the Jets, to the Giants, and then a little bit in Detroit. Overall grades of 90 plus in 5 out of those 6 seasons, with almost no pass rush to speak of, meaning It was all run defense driven. 93, 87, 92, 91, 92, 93, 7 in his last season. Then he started to taper off late. And he was the guy, I think he was really high up there in run stop percentage as well.
He made that like his own.
And so from a PFF perspective, I used to always say there are guys that are disruptors. And you would say that's like a Will Fork, right? You're not going to block him. He's going to hold the point. He's going to, blow up the line of scrimmage. And then there are players that finish plays. And Damon Harrison was both big snacks. He had that. He was the first guy. I invented the term tackle radius. His radius from making plays up and down the line of scrimmage was unbelievable. So, yeah, I think he deserves mention. If we're just talking run-stopping nose tackles, it was a different style, a little different style than the Will Fork or Hampton, but the dude made plays and was unblockable.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about peak, Will Fork would need those first 2 years of his career in terms of PFF grading to match Harrison's peak, right? Like he would need those extra couple of years to get to where Harrison was in terms of being an absolute dominant force against the run. So absent those years, it's tough. I would, like I said, Dexter Lawrence would be the guy I would put in there. I would be flipping a coin over Will Fork and Snacks.
This was fun, man. This is fun going through all the history here. Let's talk J.J. Watt. ESPN gave him the versatile defensive lineman breakdown. I think it's worth telling the story about when PFF was going to the 0 to 100 grading system, the history there and what happened with J.J. Watt and how he was breaking the system at the time when we were trying to figure out how do we convey his greatness without neutering it too much by changing from this plus minus to a 0 to 100 system at the time, right around 2015.
Yeah, I mean, he's on the roster. The only question is what you designate him as, right? Whether you want to call him as an edge rusher, a defensive tackle, or just a versatile defensive lineman. He's on your 53. In fact, he's one of your starters. I just don't know where you're lining him up. He could easily be, I think his peak performance, his most dominant version of himself was being that interior one gap penetrating defensive lineman who would often shoot the wrong gap but make it right anyway by being so unblockable and unstoppable and into the backfield. But he could be an elite player at any alignment along the defensive front, and he's probably the only guy that you can say that about that we've even talked about so far. Like utterly destructive, dominant player.
And Watt came into the league as 3-4 defensive end and then just became a pure straight-up edge rusher and was dominant at both. The story I was hinting at from a PFF perspective, remember, it used to be a plus-minus system. Justin Smith would lead annually at plus 35, plus 40. It was a great number. Justin Smith, he was the standard. And then J.J. Watt comes in, and he was like a plus 90, plus 100. And so when at the time we were converting to a 0 to 100 system, we were like, if J.J. Watt's a plus 100 and the second best defensive tackle in the league is like a plus 40, a plus 30, it was Fletcher Cox, whoever it was at the time, how do you convey that? And then Donald ended up being the guy that broke it at a similar level with Watt. How do you properly convey that? Because the old plus minus system conveyed it. It was like Watt is a plus 100. Aaron Donald would have been a plus 100. And the next guy would have been plus 40 or 50, say. And how do you convey that dominance? Because the plus minus system did it, the 0 to 100 grade, when you converted it and it said this guy's a 93 and the next guy's a 91, it didn't have the same impact, I don't think, that the plus minus did. So we would debate that heavily. Like, how do you capture J.J. Watt's greatness? That's how good he was for that stretch of time in Houston.
And then the other thing to factor in with J.J. Watt is the stretch ended effectively when injuries started to hit. Like, he began his career with 5 straight years playing every single game. And honestly, that may have been it may have been the greatest 5-year stretch of any defensive lineman in NFL history. It's certainly up there with like Reggie White as one of the best we've ever seen. 4 straight first-team All-Pros, 2 seasons with over 20 sacks, like utterly nuts. And then in the next 7 years of his career, he played 16 games 3 times, including the final year in Arizona where he won Comeback Player of the Year. Not one. It was a vote getter for Comeback Player of the Year. Like, his career was already amazing, but it might have been Aaron Donald rivaling had he been able to stay healthy.
He had the disruption, the pure pressure rate, win rate, what have you. He had the finish where multiple seasons with 20 plus sacks, including the playoffs. He had the batted passes. So if he wasn't getting there, he's reading the quarterback. He also had some of those freak plays. I think it was EJ Manuel. I think he picked off, took it to the house. I mean, there was a point in Watt's career where because he had a couple of those plays in the season, they were talking about MVP for JJ Watt. Because if you have a bunch of sacks, a couple pick 6 or 2, I think he caught a touchdown at tight end. By the way, I think he could have been a Pro Bowl tight end, but that's a whole different story. Just from a skill set standpoint, he was at directional Michigan as a tight end, but yeah, he could absolutely do it all. Whereas we debate TJ Watt, TJ Watt doesn't have like the down to down domination. He just finishes and has the high sack totals. JJ had both and from multiple positions.
I mean, JJ won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times in 4 years. Like he was on an Aaron Donald spectrum, and then injuries hit him, and he never really rebounded to becoming that player again. But if we give him, like, if you sort of how you value that is an interesting thing. Like if you say, well, what would he have been if he just stayed healthy? You can make the case that he's one of the top 5 players, on the defensive side in NFL history. The guy was an absolute force.
All right, let's go linebacker here. PFF has Patrick Willis, highest graded career, and then Ray Lewis as their 2. So they went 2 starters, Patrick Willis, Ray Lewis. They have honorable mention Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly. ESPN has 5 linebackers on their team in order: Ray Lewis, Bobby Wagner, Brian Urlacher, Levante David, and then Luke Kuechly, with Derek Brooks on the practice squad. This is a good team. I mean, the only one, Patrick Willis, is going to be a healthy debate here, getting him on the ESPN squad, I would say.
Yeah, my other debate would be, do you lose too many of Ray Lewis's seasons to the 90s? Now, he played till 2012, so you still get over a decade of him in the 2000s, but he came into the league in 96.
But 2000 Ravens, I think Ray Lewis has to be on it. I mean, even his PFF grade is 91.8 from 06 on.
Sure.
Which is and that's the tail end of his prime. So I think Ray Lewis, absolutely. Patrick Willis is the one that's being slept on. And I would say Kuechly should probably be higher. I think, remember, there was a point where it was Luke Kuechly and Bobby Wagner, I think, is the clear 2 linebackers in the NFL. And you would put Kuechly as the top guy over Wagner. I think Wagner, like Levante David, their longevity is outstanding. Kuechly doesn't have that, but I think Kuechly's peak is probably better than both of those guys.
Yeah. So how many linebackers do we have? 5, 4?
ESPN has 5 on their team in a practice squad. Okay, PFF has 5. The 2 starters, Patrick Willis and Ray Lewis, plus the 2 honorable mention. The one I would debate is Brian Urlacher. So you talked about the trendsetters and everything. He comes in 2000. He's out of New Mexico. He was like he's playing I think they were playing that 3-3-5, and he was like a hybrid safety, hybrid everything type of player. And then he steps into the league as a very athletic middle linebacker in the cover 2, Tampa 2 era, where he's going to run the seam and, take away the middle of the field and everything. But it's an interesting career because from a PFF perspective, you miss his first 6 or 7 years. And then when I was getting a lot of my information that I was getting early in the 2000s would be like Sporting News. Sporting News had this really cool Scouts Take, Scouts View. It was a very detailed magazine in the early 2000s. And I remember people questioning Urlacher back then. I think Dr. Z would do the Sports Illustrated. Like he was Neil Hornsby, PFF founder, Neil Hornsby's inspiration, because he would kind of do PFF grading on his own. He would just kind of like break down players. I think he was questioning Urlacher early in the century. So Urlacher might be in that world where he's slightly more reputation than production. For these lists, I'm not saying he wasn't good. I'm saying for all-time lists, Urlacher may have been slightly overrated. That being said, he was the prototypical Tampa 2 middle linebacker, had a great season in 06 when the Bears defense carried them to the Super Bowl. I think Urlacher might be the guy that I would take off the list in favor of a guy like Patrick Willis.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think Ray Lewis is on. I think Patrick Willis is on. I think you have to put Derek Brooks on there, even losing the years in the 90s. Derek Brooks, just special. In the 2000s, made 4 All-Pros. I think he hung around long enough, right? He went to 2008 is the last year of his career. I think you can argue Derek Brooks hung around long enough into the 2000s that he makes the team. Then it starts to get really fuzzy. There's a bunch more players who you lose years in the 90s, like guys like Donnie Edwards. I think you can argue. I think your Urlacher point is legit. I think you could argue Lance Briggs was a better linebacker for Chicago for a bunch of those years where they were playing together. This is one position, though, where the irritating way they used to do all pros and blah, blah, blah ruins everything. The all-decade teams are useless for linebacker because they
tackles and reputation.
Outside linebackers that were edge rushers.
Tackles and reputation. There's something
it's position designation, right? Like DeMarcus Ware is part of the all-decade team at linebacker.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was awful. The Derek Brooks thing, too. He was – let's talk – there's the trendsetter and then there's the prototypes. I think if you're a prototype, that matters. If you're just like a trendsetter, the first person to do it, maybe that's a little overrated. But there was a point where every team that was running Tampa 2 was like, you need your Derek Brooks. You need your Warren Sapp 3 technique and you need your Derek Brooks. You need your weak side, will linebacker, chase and run guy. Derek Brooks was the prototype. And then the other prototypes on here, when we look back at the Legion of Boom and just how good that Seattle defense was, Bobby Wagner's on this list, and eventually Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas. Those are all the prototypes for that perfect system. So for the cover 3 system, Bobby Wagner is probably the most underrated of them because it's like, well, you have to have a Sherman on the outside. You have to have an Earl Thomas patrolling the deep middle. But, oh, by the way, you need a Bobby Wagner to match routes in the middle as well, which is why he's on this list. Plus, he's still playing pretty good football for the Commanders. But, yeah, the prototypes, I think, matter, and that's where I think Brooks deserves a mention. So I would put Brooks over Urlacher. Maybe I'm just hating on Urlacher too much. I'd put Brooks over Urlacher. And then Patrick Willis, if we could just discuss his career really quick, comes in 07. He's just like Kuechly, basically. Just Willis never had a bad season. Yeah. And he only played from 07 to 14. But that stretch of play was unreal.
Longevity.
Yeah. He was unbelievable for 7 years in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. Literally the only thing you could possibly criticize is a relative lack of longevity, but he was an absolute dominant. He was the best linebacker in the league from the moment he came into it till the moment he left.
He could cover, play the run, rush the passer as a blitzer. He was fantastic.
And then like San Francisco went from him to like they had this run where they had an absurd sequence of linebackers in the inside. They brought in Takeo Spikes. He was part of that duo. Then they went to Navarro Bowman, and then Bowman they got in Chris Borland for 1 year. He had 1 year of balling out and then called it a career because of concussions.
The biggest what if, man. Borland, I mean, a lot of draft people love Borland, but he was undersized, but you just watch him play. It's like, wow, he's really good. We didn't have PFF college grading on him, so I imagine that would have been great as well. But 1 year replacing Patrick Willis and looks dominant and then retires.
All right. Throw in a few more names before we figure out who our 5 are. Derek Johnson from the Chiefs, I think, should be thrown in there as a name. Here's one to really think about. Bart Scott. So everyone, obviously Ray Lewis gets all the attention, but there was a period of time where Bart Scott was by far and away the best old school, strong side Sam linebacker of anybody in football. That dude would blow up lead blocks, fullbacks, offensive linemen like nobody else in the NFL. And that gets completely forgotten about.
To oversimplify schemes here, 4-3, of course, you have 4 down defensive linemen. 3-4, you have 3 defensive linemen. The way the 3-4 used to work is you'd have the 2 inside backers, and one was the thumper. One was the guy who essentially played like a defensive lineman, which was blow up blocks and then let the other linebacker make all the plays. That was Bart Scott's role. That was the PFF story I just told on a recent podcast somewhere else where I said PFF would grade the thumper sometimes higher, the guy that got two tackles in a game, would grade him higher than the guy that had 14 tackles in the game because they were recognizing that part of the role and what he would do. Bart Scott was the best at that. I love that as a name because he wasn't the glory guy. He was you set everyone else up guy, and he was so good at that.
Yeah, like nobody gives credit to that, and it's a scheme specific thing. Like I don't know that Bart Scott could do all of the things that some of these other linebackers could, but for that specific role, there was nobody in the NFL that was anywhere near as good as he was. One more name I would throw out there before we wrap it up: London Fletcher. You lose a couple of years of his career to the 90s. I think 98 he came in. London Fletcher was a guy who I think the narrative was kind of all over the place on him. People loved him, and then there was a group of people pushing back, being like, yeah, but look how many of these tackles came 6 yards downfield. And now I think maybe that pushback went too far, and actually London Fletcher was probably a better player than the analysis settled on. But
you're arguing against yourself. I think only PFF was saying that at the time, where the grading
was there were other people as well, but I do think it's kind of gone too far that way.
All right. I think ESPN's list of I'm good with Ray Lewis, Bobby Wagner, Levante David, Luke Kuechly. I would take out Urlacher and add in Derek Brooks and then put Patrick Willis and then maybe go Urlacher after that.
I want Ray Lewis, Patrick Willis, Derek Brooks. Then I want Luke Kuechly. Who's my fifth? I'm going to put Bart Scott in there. I need a thumper. For my team. I'm putting Bart Scott on there.
Brandon Spikes was on his way to being that kind of.
I got too many tacklers. I need a guy who's going to go in there, take on a fullback, and annihilate him.
In your 3-4. All right, let's go corner here. Let's see. PFF has Richard Sherman, Antoine Winfield, and Darrelle Revis as their three, with an honorable mention to Champ Bailey. ESPN has Darrelle Revis, Champ Bailey, Rondé Barber, Richard Sherman, Patrick Peterson, with a practice squad player, Jalen Ramsey. Discuss.
Revis is an obvious one.
Revis is the best. He is number one.
How many do we put in for ESPN? How many do we need for our team?
ESPN put in 5.
Okay. So I think Revis is easy. To me, the starters are Revis and Bailey.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
If I'm creating a slot, I would side with PFF, and I'm putting Winfield over Rondé Barber. But I understand entirely everyone else doing the opposite.
Would Chris Harris be in there?
Yes. Would he be in the team?
Healthy debate between. So Antoine Winfield and Rondé Barber are more of your quintessential slots. When we talk about prototypes, that was Barber. Barber was the guy that's, he's blitzing, he's making tackles.
Yeah.
And then I think Antoine Winfield did that as well. And then Chris Harris wasn't exactly that guy, but he was just so good at covering slot receivers and then could play on the outside and dabble there as well.
Chris Harris would be in that conversation. And then the other name that you could think about would be Tyrann Mathieu, who we think about as a safety now, but was effectively the nickel, the slot corner for the first chunk of his career.
And he was Antoine Winfield was my comp for him. And look, I'm sure every single slot that tackles a little bit gets an Antoine Winfield comp, but that was like the real one. Like I try not to use it again because Tyrann Mathieu at LSU was a playmaker, forced fumbles, found his way to the football, and he did that at the NFL level as well. So I think Mathieu, he had stretches of play where he was unbelievable in that role. So there was cornerback debates at points, whereas Richard Sherman or Darrelle Revis at the tail end of Revis's run, and then Richard Sherman or Patrick Peterson. And I think you just have to be fair here and say Patrick Peterson played way more man coverage, a more difficult role, but Richard Sherman is the prototype for the number of teams that tried to find their Richard Sherman so that they could run the defense. That was the best defense for a period of time in the NFL. And the teams that failed finding their Richard Sherman, there was a lot. He was the very best at playing Seattle cover 3 corner.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Patrick Peterson is the overrated name from the group. He's the guy I would be looking to exclude from my list and figure out alternative suggestions. ESPN's next man up, like their practice squad guy, is Jalen Ramsey. I'm not sure he'd be my next guy up either. Like, I think that's excluding a bunch of names that, again, recency bias and who are you forgetting about? I mean, if you want to look at stats, there was a run where Nnamdi Asomugha was thrown out like 8 times in, God knows how long. Never tested. Like, he had some of the best stats out there. Asante Samuel will tell you Asante Samuel was the best cornerback of the 2000s. So, he's a guy that everyone forgets about as well. There's some really good cornerbacks from the last 20 years that are not mentioned now because of these guys. There's
also that stat going around of 06 Champ Bailey,
which is wrong, by the way.
So listen, let me add some context to this. The stat is something to the effect of what he gave up, like 8 catches or some ridiculous number, like 8 catches on 50 targets. It's some ridiculous number.
Yeah.
Now I wouldn't refute it directly by saying, well, the PFF numbers have him with 41 catches, because that's taking in, is he, playing cover 2, and it's like swing to the running back could be charged to him or whatever it may be. So I wouldn't say, well, PFF has 41 and the stat says he has 8, therefore it's way off. I assume wherever that stat came from had a couple qualifiers in there, like when he's in man-to-man and when he's in this or when he's in that. So I'm not ready to refute it with that number, but PFF, just for perspective, has him 41 receptions on 77 targets in 2006 for 466 yards. I'm not saying every one of those, like PFF has it as a system, has to charge everybody, has to charge someone on every play. It's not the perfect system for accounting for receptions and targets, but it'd be really tough to prove whatever that crazy stat is that's going around that always goes viral.
That stat is too old for that to be the explanation. Like, there are people could go out there now and sort of create a sort of a better version, if you like, of a PFF target coverage stat based off either individual charting or whatever they want, or, some various other analytical means of excluding some of those plays that genuinely aren't really anybody's coverage, like a blown play that you've got to assign to somebody. You could get a better number than some of the PFF numbers, but that stat line that you're referencing has been out there for like 15 years and was clearly bullshit when it was created. Like, somebody just went and decided this is what he'd given up, and it was like nothing. And it lingered, and it's lingered for the last 15 years. It's never been, I think, close to accurate.
That said, we'd still have Champ Bailey as one of the top 2 corners of the era.
Names that are getting sort of forgotten, right? Like, there again, Asante Samuel, Nnamdi Asomugha. Asomugha is a really interesting one because that dude has some of the best coverage stats of all time. But back in the day, before cornerbacks really tracked, Nnamdi Asomugha played right cornerback every single snap, played off man every single snap, at a time when more often than not, quarterbacks passed to the right-hand side of the field, i.e. away from that cornerback position. And the other cornerback for the Raiders was almost invariably terrible. So there was basically no incentive to ever throw the ball in Nnamdi Asomugha's direction. And then later in his career, when he finally did go to a different system that did not play off-man coverage every single snap, he got barbecued in zone coverage. So interesting career.
I'll give you some context here. PFF did not have his first couple years in the league. He was drafted in 2003. But in 2006, he had 8 interceptions and a 90 coverage grade, right? So when he was thrown at, he was making big plays. The next year, he was targeted just 37 times in a full season. 37 targets, then 30 targets, then 28 targets in a full season.
Those are half a good number.
That's unbelievable. And that's why Revis's 09 is like the greatest thing ever, because he was targeted and he produced, and it was all against, number 1 receivers. But we'll talk about, if we get there. But that was the thing. We debated Nnamdi and Revis for a little while as well, just because they were doing it completely differently. Like, everyone was legitimately scared of Nnamdi Asomugha. Then he joins the 2011 Eagles super team. And he wasn't as good playing zone or whatever.
But even then, it took like a year for people to realize, in this scheme, he can't play it. He's not good in zone. And the following year, 2012, he gave up 698 yards and a pass rating of 120 when he was targeted. Like, he got barbecued that year once people figured out that he couldn't actually play zone at the same level.
Nnamdi gave up 4 touchdowns in a 5-year stretch with the Raiders, 06 through 10. and then in 11 and 12 with Philly, gave up 9 touchdowns and, over 1,000 yards during that stretch when he gave up less than 1,000 in the previous 5. I mean, it was crazy. Like, we haven't seen anything like that since Nnamdi, where he was completely avoided at that extent.
He was obviously a really, really good corner. The question is, how much are all those other things? Like, how close to the absurd numbers was he relative to how much of it was the Raiders and the scheme and the fact that the other side was terrible, et cetera?
That's the other part, is he was always paired with someone awful on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, we're just not going to throw to him. I think Nnamdi's worth at least discussing. And I know Schatz has, Football Outsiders and all their work goes way back. He was talking about the target thing for, years, even before PFF, or at the same time that PFF would have started and started talking about it. Anything else at corner? Do you want to talk about Revis's 09 really quick? We're in no rush.
I mean, Revis's 09, I think, is the greatest single season of coverage play in memory. I mean, maybe, there were certainly the best with any kind of significant statistical weight to it, like that's been charted, right? PFF grades, advanced data, maybe guys way back when had as good a season, but it's not statistically quantified to the same degree. Revis that year tracked everybody, followed them into the slot, which nobody did, even when they were tracking receivers left to right, and faced a who's who of elite receivers and shut almost all of them down to an absurd degree. And what's different between him, like at that kind of time, once teams decided that Nnamdi Asomugha was a good corner, he didn't get targeted, right? You kept talking like 30 targets a year. The fact that Revis tracked receivers meant that could not happen, right? Because if you were going to not target him, you had to say, all right, I know we have Randy Moss, but we have to decide Randy Moss is not going to see the ball this game because Revis is going to follow him everywhere. So consequently, instead of seeing 30-something targets, Revis that year saw 111 targets. He was targeted basically as much as anybody in the game. And on 111 targets, he gave up 41 catches for a passer rating of 32 into his coverage. And he had 23 pass breakups to go along with 6 interceptions. Nobody came close to doing anything like that.
And as you mentioned, that's tracking Andre Johnson, Randy Moss, Steve Smith. I'm going to miss some of the names from that time. Stevie Johnson. Was that him for Buffalo at that point?
That year.
Roddy White, I believe, with Atlanta. I mean, he would go up Marvin Harrison in Indy. And so he would go up against the very best corners every single week. And you had to. Chad Johnson, Ocho, and Cincy. So he would just go up against the best every single week. That's why he had to get targeted. And having 6 picks when he was playing all-man coverage, that's a wild number as well, because man coverage is usually more pass breakups, fewer interceptions. Zone coverage, you usually get more picks. Your eyes are on the quarterback. He did both. He broke up passes, he turned the ball over, and he didn't give up catches. Just 41 catches all season on 100, like as you mentioned, 37% completions into his coverage. That's insane. So Revis 09. Do you want Charles Woodson made practice squad for the safeties? Let's talk safeties. We can talk where Woodson fits into this whole thing. But safety for ESPN's Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, Brian Dawkins, and then Earl Thomas with Charles Woodson on the practice squad. PFF has Troy Polamalu and Ed Reed with an honorable mention for Eric Weddle.
Eric Weddle. I think
Woodson should probably be on the corner list, I think. Like I'd put Woodson over Patrick Peterson.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd put him at corner. And
I would put him as like my corners would be Champ Bailey, Darrelle Revis, Charles Woodson, Antoine Winfield, and probably Rondé Barber, and then Woodson can be he can play outside or inside if I need him to. That's my 5 for the depth chart.
And was Woodson the defensive player of the year in 09?
Yes, Woodson had defensive player of the year that Revis had the best season anybody's ever seen from a cornerback.
And it wasn't like Woodson wasn't a slouch that year. Like Woodson deserved it too. Like I would have chosen Revis, but I'm not like upset that Charles Woodson got it in 09 because Woodson was drafted in 98 and was an outside corner most of his career. In 09, he starts to play a lot more slot. He starts to play the Antoine Winfield type of role, but with better run defense even because he's like a linebacker. So Woodson was a slot corner in name, but this is when he's like he didn't really start the transition to safety, but he was playing like the safety that comes down and plays nickel. He was a linebacker-like player in the slot for Green Bay, turned the ball over with 9 interceptions. Like, he did it all. Played great run defense, had 9 picks, rushed the passer when they blitzed him, did the whole thing. So Woodson was an absolute game changer. He needs to be on that team. He didn't change to safety until late in his career when he went back to Oakland. But he was an elite outside corner, an elite slot corner, and a good safety. Charles Woodson, even actually an elite safety season in 2015 with a 90-plus PFF grade. So I'd put Woodson with the corners as well, whether it's an outside corner or slot. I think Palazzolo and Ed Reed, though, they are the 2 best of the quarter century, 2 special players in completely different ways.
Yeah, they are. Those 2, they're the best 2 safeties of that 25 years. They also complement each other. I can imagine the 2 of them playing the same backfield. It would be insane.
Unbelievable.
Troy's
just running around near the line of scrimmage. He's like, Ed, just cover me. And Ed's like, I'll know. I know where the ball's going anyway.
Yeah, it will be incredible. Dawkins is the interesting name because I think he would be the 3rd safety on the list, but you lose a lot of his career to the 90s. Like, I think 96 he came in and he didn't play, like deep into the 2000s. Like, you got, I think, almost most of a decade, but not, he didn't play sort of 15 years into that period. So Dawkins would be the guy where if you were just looking for the 3rd best player, I think he'd be the name. But I wonder if you lose too many of his years to the previous decade for him to make it.
Would you put Earl Thomas over him? Because Earl became the next Ed Reed, basically. And again, using the word prototype, the guy that made, when you ask Pete Carroll in Seattle, what made the Seattle cover 3 work? And I think they needed Sherman, and I think they needed Cam Chancellor, but they might say Earl Thomas, patrolling the middle of the field, playing true center field safety, more than any safety in the league, Earl Thomas.
So, yeah, next names up, you would have Earl Thomas, you would have Eric Weddle, you would have maybe Eric Berry for the Chiefs as well. You would probably have Harrison Smith for the Vikings, who's somehow still playing. And then the one uncomfortable name that no one's going to want to talk about is Darren Sharper, who as a player was extremely good. As a human being, maybe less so.
Yeah, so we'll just talk about it quickly. He was a really good player. That's it. And he was part of that 09 Saints team that won the Super Bowl. He had 9 picks that year, and a big part of their run was the turnover differential. Like, the difference in the 09 Saints that won the Super Bowl and all the other Drew Brees teams is they weren't, I don't even know if they were great on defense. They just got the ball back to the offense. Right. They turned it over, and Sharper was a big part of that.
You've also got a bunch of sort of strange career. I mean, yeah, to be, for anyone that doesn't know, Sharper was arrested at some point for aggravated rape and is, very much persona non grata because of that now. But as a player, phenomenal and has a case, I think, to be on one of these teams. You also have obviously Sean Taylor, who his career gets cut short by getting killed. But Sean Taylor had as much talent as anybody for Washington back in the day. You got Bob Sanders, an incredible, unique safety whose career gets cut short for injuries. Like, a bunch of guys who had shortened careers relative to what could and should have been for different reasons.
Sean Taylor had just 4 years in the league, and he was. It's funny because we talk positional value a ton, and you kind of diminish safety. And I think overall that's true. But like any other position, when you have a special one, it changes everything. When you have an Ed Reed, when you have a Palazzolo, when you have what Sean Taylor is capable of, when you have a special safety, it changes the whole dynamic of the defense. Because of what they're able to do. If you have Earl Thomas that can patrol double what someone else can, it just opens everything up defensively. So special safeties make a massive impact. And I think everybody on this list made huge impacts on their respective teams.
By the way, player I forgot to mention, a corner that should have been in that conversation, Casey Hayward, would have a good case to be one of the best corners during that period.
Hayward was a weird one because I think he strangely benefited from just situational stuff, but he was also underrated and very good. But that goes back to, like, would you trust him in the same thing, doing the same thing as a Sherman or a Revis or whoever? And I don't know if I would ever put him in that same bucket. But yeah, he was good. Casey Hayward played slot, played outside. He was very good.
Adrian Wilson is an interesting safety name from the Cardinals. Was one of these kind of
the Bob Sanders thing too. Like, wild how Indianapolis changed. For those who forget, Peyton Manning's first Super Bowl run, 2006, they were fresh off giving up 400 yards on the ground to the Jaguars, to rookie Maurice Jones-Drew and Fred Taylor. Late in the season, Bob Sanders comes back, and all of a sudden the run defense is great. And our friend of the show, Booger McFarland, Booger started playing better during the playoff run as well. But Bob Sanders comes in. We talk about safeties changing a defense. I don't think you've ever seen a safety change a defense the way Bob Sanders did with the Colts. All of a sudden, the Colts defense is good. Peyton has 3 touchdowns and 7 picks in a 4-game stretch on the way to the Super Bowl. But it was Bob Sanders in the defense that made that whole thing work.
Yeah, I mean, you can't include Bob Sanders in anything like this because he just didn't have the playing time. But effectively, like, he literally not once in his career did he play a full season, 16 games, start every game, right? Not once. Yeah. Only twice in his career. God damn it, stupid gesture.
How many times in his career, Sam?
Only twice in his career did he play, let's say, close to a full season's worth of snaps, right? In those 2 years, he was all-pro both times, right? So the only 2 times in his career he played effectively something like a full season, he made all-pro. Like that, for Bob, he's the classic what could have been, not what actually was.
All right. Anything else on safety, or we want to? I don't even want to touch on special teams. We got Justin Tucker, Shane Leckler, kicker, punter, Devin Hester, return specialist for ESPN. PFF has Matt Prater as the kicker, and Pat McAfee. I think they're sucking up to Pat McAfee here as the punter. We did give Pat McAfee the Punter of the Decade award a few years ago.
Yes. So I think, I think Justin Tucker and Devin Hester, I think, are probably and arguably, to me, the kicker and the return specialist. Because if for no other reason than Hester did both, right? He returned kicks and punts. Like, Cordero Patterson, I will maintain, is a better kick returner than Devin Hester ever was. But Cordero Patterson didn't return punts. So you can't really have him on the best return man of the last 25 years versus a guy that did. Punter, I think you do have an argument, though. Like Leckler, you've got a case for a guy like him, but McAfee absolutely has an argument. I think you've got a bunch of guys, actually, that had a run of top-level punter.
Where's our punter friend? We'll let him choose the all-century punter with the research he's been doing.
Nice.
So ESPN went ahead. We can wrap it up with this. They went ahead and put a coaching staff together as well. Okay. Head coach, I think, is clear, Bill Belichick. But they went Kyle Shanahan as offensive coordinator and then Wade Phillips as defensive coordinator. Is there anyone else that you'd put? I think Spags probably deserves a mention in there, given what he's done with the Giants and the Chiefs. But Wade Phillips had quite a run as well.
Yeah. Vic Fangio, you would argue, could be in that category as well. Tampa, the 25 years takes you almost like the majority of the Tampa 2 era was in that period of time.
You have the Tampa 2 era, and then you have the Legion of Boom, Seattle cover 3 era, and then you have the Vic Fangio era. So the eras, is oversimplifying here, have gone from cover 2 to cover 3 to cover 4, right? You've basically gone from too high, Tampa 2, but hey, we're sneaking a third deep defender there with the middle backer. That's Tampa 2. Then you get into cover 3 and pattern matching in the Seattle era. And then you get into cover 4, which is how do we just get more bodies in coverage, fewer in the box, but still able to play the run in a quarters type of scheme. So cover 5 is next. We've gone 2, 3, 4. 5 is next.
And if you've opened the door to cheating by putting Kyle Shanahan as your offensive coordinator, well, then Andy Reid has to be in that conversation as offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator could be Pete Carroll, could be Mike Tomlin. Like those names start to get thrown in there for defensive names.
Kyle was at least offensive coordinator. Andy Reid has been a head coach for the entirety of the century. Kyle was an offensive coordinator for years before getting the head coaching job. But a big part of his success did come as head coach when he did have his starting quarterback. He's almost always in the NFC Championship. Who else was it? Oh, Andy Reid. If you want to mention Andy Reid and what he's done, we saw him take Donovan McNabb early this century he was a project at Syracuse. Remember, there was a point, I just want to take you back for a minute because we have all day. There was a point where like Tommy Frazier was the best quarterback in the nation, but option quarterbacks don't go to the NFL. You just don't. You just don't draft Nebraska quarterbacks and let them play quarterback. You just don't. But Donovan McNabb was basically like an option quarterback at Syracuse with a little bit of drop back passing. And Andy Reid turned him into an early 2000s West Coast quarterback, went to 4 NFC championships with McNabb. Then he took Michael Vick, fresh out of jail, turned him into an MVP candidate in 2010. Vick never approached that level of success that Andy Reid had. He took Alex Smith, turned him into a really good NFL quarterback with a high winning percentage for a few years, including the passer rating title in 2017, and then took Patrick Mahomes. And, of course, I think Mahomes got Reid over the hump to win the Super Bowls, but you still have Mahomes as a project type of quarterback who immediately hits his ceiling in his first year as a starter. So Andy Reid, all the way through, has been elevating quarterbacks and, again, however you want to, split the credit pie. That was after already having Brett Favre and just like everywhere he's been, we've seen peak quarterback play, I think, relative to their baseline.
Jim Johnson as well for defense coordinator. Like that guy for those early 2000s Eagles teams, they had a nasty defense, and that system has had ripples. Like that's still that legacy is still going.
I would pick Spags as defensive coordinator for real. The 07 Giants, and then this run with the Chiefs. I don't think you're going to find much better than that at defensive coordinator. Unless you want to just give it to Belichick, but he's the head coach.
You could give it. Well, you could put Andy Reid as head coach and have Belichick as DC.
There's a fair argument that Andy Reid's a better head coach than Bill Belichick. Belichick has
Carroll as head coach for vibes, and then Andy Reid as offense coordinator and Bill Belichick as defensive coordinator.
I like it. So Pete Carroll, yes, Pete Carroll's our head coach. Andy Reid offensive coordinator, Belichick defensive coordinator.
There you go.
And as long as Belichick has Brady at quarterback, he can win. If you take him away, though, I don't know. It's not the same.
I might have Jim Johnson as my DC, honestly. That defense he had was nasty, and it's still having effect on today's NFL.
Who gets the most credit for Tampa 2? Like Monty Kiffin Dungy as the architect, and then Tony Dungy taking it. Like Monty could be in there.
How many of his? You got to lose a chunk of his to the 90s, though, right?
Yeah, he's mostly 90s. That is interesting, though. In the last 25 years, if you talk about the trendy defenses going from Tampa 2 to Seattle 3, and by the way, Tampa 2 was replicated around the NFL a lot better than Seattle 3.
Far more successfully.
Seattle 3 was not replicated because I think the only team off the top of my head that had good success was the 2017 Jags, who had Gus Bradley and had Jalen Ramsey. That was the only team that had, I think, any semblance of success, anything close to what Seattle had, and, made it to the AFC Championship. But, Dan Quinn tried to do it in Atlanta. You couldn't find the free safety. You couldn't find the corner. You couldn't find Bobby Wagner. You couldn't find the pass rush. There was no team that had all of that. So when you talk about scheme trends, of all the schemes, Seattle's is probably the most player driven because every prototype is the one that Seattle had.
Yeah, no, agreed. They somehow stumbled into the correct prototype for that defensive system with everybody they had on that defense, and no one else ever came close to replicating that. Yeah, Tampa 2, meanwhile, almost every single instance where that was like brought in was pretty successful. I mean, Lovie Smith had some nasty defenses in Chicago with that Tampa 2.
The Colts Super Bowl run was Dungy and that Tampa 2, and the Colts defense wasn't great, but they had the Bob Sanders run. Anyway, it's a good show. That was fun. I think great job by Seth Walder and Aaron Schatz. Running back was questionable. Maybe we'll have one of them on the show to talk about.
And Justin Jefferson.
Themselves. Justin Jefferson. Was that your biggest discrepancy there?
Those two, I think, are the least defensible, selections. I honestly can't construct an argument for Priest Holmes to be on that running back list at all. And Justin Jefferson, you can construct the argument, but I don't think it's a strong one to argue that Justin Jefferson's 5 years are worth more than the entire careers of like Andre Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, players like that. Yeah. I just don't think that's a strong case.
Yeah, I agree. I think I nitpicked a couple, edges and linebackers and corners. I think Woodson needs to be on the list, not just practice squad. I think he needs to be on the corner list.
Same.
And I agree. The running back's probably the most egregious one for me. Either Adrian Peterson or LaDainian Tomlinson needs to be on that list over Priest Holmes.
I mean, LaDainian Tomlinson needs to be. I think you can then argue how many other players should be over Priest Holmes, but Tomlinson. I don't think you can create an argument that says Priest Holmes belongs there and LaDainian Tomlinson does not.
All right, man, that was fun. That's what June's
by the way, people forget what an absolute juggernaut that early 2000s Chiefs offensive line was. Like, they had the best offensive line in the NFL as well.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of why Priest Holmes' peak was as good as it was. Because that offensive line had like Hall of Famer left tackle, Hall of Fame left guard. It was a beast.
It was, and they had the Martz system brought over there. So Mike Martz system for a couple of years was really tough to defend. Now that was probably player driven too, but Kansas City had elements of it. And if we go way back, like Trent Green was going to be the guy thrown to Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt with Marshall Faulk out of the backfield, making the Super Bowl run. In 1999, he gets hurt. Kurt Warner takes over. Well, Trent Green had a little bit of that success with St. Louis. Then they trade him. He goes to Kansas City with Dick Vermeil, and they were running the same deal. That was what Priest Holmes was benefiting from. He was playing the Marshall Faulk role in that system, which was really good for about a 5-year period in the NFL.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that offensive line was an absolute monster. That was a big part of Priest Holmes' peak.
All right. I like to watch old games while I'm working throughout the day. So I might throw on some 0-2 film here. I might get some 0-2 Chiefs to see Priest Holmes. Maybe I'm missing.
Go fire up some old Steelers tape and find out if Alan Faneca was good.
I will. I'll make sure. JJ says Steve and Sam for sure make the all-quarter podcast team. Nice. Quarter century. I mean, we've been doing it since 2012. So we got some longevity, continuing to grow, almost to 50,000 subscribers here on YouTube, just on Check the Mic. Got to put us up there. Who else is competing? Who's the all quarter century, all podcast team? The around the NFL guys.
Yeah.
Who else?
Pardon my takes. Got to be up there, right?
They're not NFL. They're not NFL.
Okay.
They're in all sports. They're in comedy, Sam. They're in a whole different genre. They're not in football. They're in comedy that dabbles in sports. The all NFL podcast team. I like to give a shout out to one of the first NFL podcasts I listened to was Ross Tucker and Matt Williamson on ESPN. I used to listen to I still remember right around 2010, I was in Tacoma, AAA, going for walks, in the off season, just yearning, just needing a little bit more NFL content and listening to Ross and Matt Williamson and, in-depth NFL breakdowns. Couldn't find a ton back then. So I still remember early,
there's no way
market.
There's no way they've ever
podcast.
There's no way they've ever podcasted it, but we should give a shout out to Pat Kerwin for doing the same show for like 87 years straight every afternoon on Sirius
XM. That's right. So shout out across the board there. Any other, I see Mina on there, Bill Barnwell, but has anyone else been grinding the NFL podcast scene for this long? I don't know. Anything else here as we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
I didn't even get to my Secretariat rant.
No, I know. I thought this was going to be a short show today. This was my week to think. Did we get this done in an hour and a half?
we're talking about 25 years of NFL history, just living in nostalgia here. Of course, it's not going to be that quick. All right, that was fun.
The number of players you forget about though is nuts.
Oh, I know, for real. So throw on some old 01, 02 film and or just games, and just let me know what you see. Let me know what interesting things you find. And people in the chat, let us know.
Let us know. So in the comments, the thing that I want to hear, who do we forget about as well? Like, forget ESPN and PFF. Like, who are the names that didn't even come up when we were trying to name some guys that we should at least mention London Fletcher. We should at least mention Bob Sanders. Like, who are the guys we didn't even get to? Like, great career players who we didn't even bring up during this conversation.
I bet we missed some good ones.
Oh, definitely.
So let us know. Programming notes. We'll be back here again Thursday, our normal 9 a.m. And then is it next week's 4th of July week? Yeah, next week we're going to be off. So next Monday and Thursday, no shows, and then we might have a couple pre-recorded for the following week. So we're gonna take a quick break, get the studio in order, recharge the batteries a little bit, give our social team, producers, give everybody a little bit of a break here, okay? And then come back strong with fresh shows mid-July. But yet, for you, the listener, just 1 week off. That's it. You'll get plenty of content. We'll have some good stuff coming. So next official shows, Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Got it?
Yep.
All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Thursday with more. Check the mic.